Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Tom Newman. How we doing?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, it's all good. We've pretty much just had a mini podcast off air, which I'm super pumped about. But just to start off with, if you let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so name's Thomas Newman. Been in strength and conditioning for a while now. Came up through being an athlete myself. I think all of us have the iron bug moment where we were super impressed with a coach that helped us early on. In my case, his name was Brian McDonough. Wrote me my first program, and I'll never forget that when he did it. My vertical jump went through the roof, and I said, "Wow, this is magic." And he said, "It's not magic; it's exercise science. Go learn it." So that was kind of my send off heading into college where at University of Rhode Island, I did a blend of both understanding communication, language, and kind of interpersonal skills to work on EQ. I also worked on the IQ elements of exercise science, of the training, loading schemes. And then from there, had an incredible internship over at Salve Regina. So university, it's located in Little Newport, Rhode Island. But I'd like to think that that was the trenches that I had my first exposure to of hundreds of athletes, N of one, coach against many, but having high levels of detail and a real appreciation of the grind. So you have to love working with an athlete at 8 a.m. as much as you do with 8 p.m. in the same day, but also making sure that your machines are cleaned, your chalk bowls are put away, and everywhere in between. It's not just the show. After that, it was a great experience to be able to try to learn about data and really both on recruiting, but then also for development and getting a chance to meet with Boyd Epley and really kind of his push of what he did with the index that he developed at Nebraska almost 30, 40 years ago, and then applying it at Salve and having it work, actually working really, really well. To the point where I said, wow, this is great. If it works at Salve, it'll work anywhere. Why don't we try to make this into a company? So then I founded my first startup called Athletic Standard, which was a venture-backed startup where we went, and our goal was to have a universal language for understanding movement. So just how you can say 2 kilos anywhere in the world, everybody knows what you're talking about. How do we quantify that for athletes, specifically for the team sport athletes that have multiple levels to their game? So they're athletic, but how athletic? Are they the biggest fish in the smallest pond? Or are they actually the biggest fish in the wrong pond? And we need to move them into a sport like handball, and then within 6 months have them on the Olympic team. So that was a great experience. And again, a lot of learning lessons, both on the business side as a CEO, but also on the training side and getting to interface with coaches like Sean Manuel and, working with him to, see what 3 national titles in, football looks like at the high school level. But then also meeting people like Coach Jost and Dan Schaefer at Florida State, winning a women's soccer national championship and really appreciating the intricacies kind of at every level. And then after that time, took some time away from, coaching after the startup ended and really tried to figure out all the things that I learned. And I think that's really important and was helpful for me was trying to understand, well, what did I just go through? How do I apply this to the future? And actually one of our customers, Yale, said that, we love the software. We loved what you did at Athletic Standard. Would you want to bring it here? And we have very clear goals for you if you come here. And that's basically, we need to beat Harvard. We haven't beat them in football in 10 years. We need to do that. And then lacrosse had a lofty goal of winning a national title, which had never happened ever. And so I said, sure, great. So we'll use science, logic, and reason and good old fashioned coaching to get on that. So I was hired in 2016, was able to successfully beat Harvard that first year, started building out our staff, built out an incredible internship to be able to help. In 3 years' time, I think we had 160 young coaches come through, get forged in the fire, go out and do great things, and then also be a part of an incredible run in lacrosse where within 18 months of installing kind of the programs and systems, we won the national title. So that was great, and we also had the number one player in the country. And for those of you overseas who don't know, the Tewaaraton is the number one award given to the top player, so it's the MVP. Yale really hadn't had anyone ever in the top 4, but let alone win it outright. So Ben Reeves winning that honor was huge. But, as any of the naysayers do, they said, you guys got lucky. You can't do it again. Like, lightning strikes wherever it wants, but it won't strike twice. So you won't do it again. The following year in football, not only did we beat Harvard again, we won an outright title, which hadn't happened. I believe it was close to 30 years. And then we also had one of our players drafted and who now is still playing at an elite level, Foye Luakan, for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we probably got lucky again. Well, following that next year, we go in and we start with the lacrosse team again. They make it to the Final Four. They make it to the finals. We did end up losing, coming in second, but that's not a bad runner-up year for something that should never happen to what is predominantly considered the Oxford and the Cambridges. The Ivy League is not really known for the athletics, but here we were competing at a high level year over year. So super excited about that and really getting a chance to do some of the most incredible team-wide coaching I'd ever done with an incredible staff that was tip of the spear. And I've said this on multiple podcasts. I'd put that 2018 2019 strength staff up against any team in the world. The level of detail, how deep we went, both on the analysis, the testing, the recruiting, end-to-end recovery, it was second to none. And so it was really great. And that's really where I also forged my relationship with Bill Kramer, who we'll talk about. And everybody kind of knows him from textbooks and education. But you haven't lived until you've seen Coach Kramer come out. I mean, he coached the hell out of a hang clean. And he get out there and make sure that, everything he's talked about in books for almost 40, 50 years, he lives it. He personifies it in the rack. And so having him come there and work with us and really design and do some incredible things was awesome. That went on to the point of where we really got into designing software, and that's a passion of mine. And we built some custom stuff in house. And then reaching out, I met the Hawkin Dynamics team, a young little startup force plate company out of Portland, Maine, and seeing kind of what they were doing with plates was really intriguing. So speaking with Ben Watson, the CEO, went over to that team and worked with them, and that was awesome. That was really great to see a company go from basically being a company trying to get into a very competitive space with international players out of Maine, to watch them grow to be the kind of powerhouse that they are, where they're the gold standard in portable force plates. And again, that's not just my opinion, that's in the research literature. And if you talk to firsthand accounts, the speed and accuracy of the platform and program we built was incredible to be a part of. And I also have really great respect for Ben and that leadership team, because during that time I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. So I had to undergo a full craniotomy. That's why I donned this nice little scar here, that, had to go in and get a brain tumor out. And the company stood by me. And again, I had a real appreciation for now training, not just for performance, but returning back to play. And as a strength coach, when you hear that, you're never going to lift again, or you can't because of whatever from the doctors, like, no, that's not an option. So we will get back under the bar and start doing that, start developing programs for my own personal journey. Was incredible. And through that time, I was approached by another Titan kind of in the field, Mark Stevenson, to go work at a research center up in Boston. And so really be the tip of the spear with a very clear objective of that in human performance. Realistically, you need to be no less than 20 years ahead of the industry. So that's very clear. It's a very daunting task, and how we do that day in and day out is a challenge in and of itself. And then lastly, taking some of those lessons learned and kind of the connections that I've made, got approached to start a consulting group, Newman HP, where, really we're the tip of the spear, but representing some of the professional clients on some of the teams that you see behind us, to help them kind of optimize performance, but really at the client level. So that's kind of the long-winded intro of kind of how I got to where I'm at, and excited, most importantly, to be here with you today and, kind of talk about, the industry of the game and just kind of the state that, our coaches and practitioners find themselves in.
Yeah, I think your experience speaks for itself. The one thing that I kind of want to start off with is how remarkable it is to bounce back from a craniotomy, and that's an amazing sort of journey as well. How is everything healing up since then?
Yeah, I mean, so anybody that's ever, dealt with brain stuff, it's tough, right? Because it's not like an elbow, it's not a shoulder. You cross that line of the psychology, the physiology, and every year. I mean, anybody who asks on a brain tumor, every year you got to go get your scan, right? And then in some cases you get it every 5 years, but no doubt, one thing zigs or zags the wrong way, it could come back. So going through that process where they're like, you may not remember some things, you may forget, you may not have some motor control. And again, we've got some of the finest rehab specialists here in the Northeast in Boston. But being prepared for that, of that, I'm not going to squat 315 again. My priorities are staying strong. And, surgeons don't really get jokes. For anybody, if you ever decide you want to get a brain tumor, they don't like jokes. They don't like, how we like to get after it. And so when you tell them bench, squat, and deadlift are your primary goals to get back, they don't get it. They're thinking walking, hanging out, daily activities of daily living. I just tried to say that, picking up heavy stuff is an activity of daily living, just how much you can let me rip it. So that was a fun experience.
100% agree with the jokes. I've had shoulder surgery, and when I challenged the anesthesiologist I'll probably beat them and stay awake for the long time. They're like, "You're not going to." I was like, "Well," I was out quick. I was out quick.
And the last thing that I remember is they found out that I coach football and I love it. And so the anesthesiologist was from Alabama. So the last thing that I
Mm.
remember hearing as they put me under was "Roll Tide," and I just started. I just remember smiling, laughing, and then I was out. Woke up 10 hours later with a titanium plate in my head and about 40 staples. So that was a unique experience. But we try to have a good mindset. Okay, great, good. Yep, this is where we're at, and let's try to build back up.
Then I think that's the goal with strength coaches is like there's so much intensity that we have to build up in the weight room and the way we coach and approach our athletes that like we need a sense of humor to be like,
Yeah,
ah,
you have to. You have to switch that gear, and you'd appreciate this. My first OTPT when I was in the hospital, they're like, "All right, we're gonna do a step challenge. We're gonna see how many steps you can get." I was like, "Roger that. We're gonna set a PR today." And they're like, "What the hell is a PR?" And I went ham. And like it was supposed to be, moderate effort. You're up and around. I'm attached to tubes and everything, but I just remember just going hard. And the poor OT at the time was like, "Man, what were you doing?" I was like, "I was trying to set a PR. I just got to get better every day." And they're like, "What are you on? You're so jacked." I said, "Man, you should see me when I'm not on Ativan and all these other medications." I said, this is the hoorah that, fuels us. I think a strength coach
mhm,
brings a unique intensity, to people's life that, unless you've ever been in a circle of people screaming and yelling for you, helping lift that weight for you, they don't know. And so again,
yeah,
it was nice to interface with some regular normies that, don't squat, that don't pull, but I tried to, make it better. That's what we say all the time, right? Make it better than we found it. Just didn't know it was going to be on
100%.
the seventh floor of Fruit Street in downtown Boston at Mass General. They weren't ready, so it was okay.
It's important to have that with ourselves, but have that camaraderie with our athletes as well. I remember one of the athletes, he was a special teams player, but he lifted like the big boys. And it's a weird comparison to make, but he always go after it. Like special teams, they usually go a little bit softer. They'll hang back a little bit, but he attacked it every single time. Every time he got like a PR or hit, like all green on his VBT, he'd walk around the weight room like, "Yes, let's go!"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Is that it? My granny could do that, and she's dead." And he would like burst out laughing. I was like, "Dude, you need to get better now. Come on."
Right. Well, and I think that's probably one of the greatest gifts that we give athletes after their career is the idea of getting better 1% each day. And yes, you want to push towards it. And whatever domain it is, strength, speed, power, what we're really instilling is consistency of effort and understanding that you can give so much more. And it's very hard to have an elite performance by yourself. It's very, very hard because you can look to the guys to the left and right of you, that's going to motivate you. You can look to the women to the left and right of you, and it's going to push you a little bit harder. And we know that. We know that the way that the brain's wired, that those external and internal drivers, ideally you want both. But in general, it's why we have elite teams and elite performances come from those teams. So I think that as coaches, if we can instill that, that's why athletes often become leaders within groups. We know small group dynamics. We know how to pat someone on the back, kick them in the ass, do anywhere in between. And that's just, again, comes from the trenches of the day in and day out grind for the thing that you love. Because especially the higher up you go, you spend a lot more time doing the things that you don't love. That's the biggest difference between college and high school. You can't just show up. When you go to the pros, any of the guys that I work with, "Hey, congrats, you're a professional athlete." And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "No, you're just a professional. It happens that you're an athlete, but at the end of the day, you're a corporation within and of yourself. You produce assets. Teams will pay for your assets or they'll trade you for assets. You're a tradable commodity within kind of the entire portfolio of whatever league you're in. So how do we reduce your liabilities? How do we increase your, assets? And understanding that it's a dynamic state. You aren't today what you're going to be tomorrow, but the things you do today will directly impact the future of the corporation. And so you have to have an honest effort forward. But again, that has implications way outside of athletics.
And it's that beautiful thing that we've been speaking about offline as well. Is like when that practical or that science meets the practical, and how can we marry both? Because an athlete is only as good as they can perform, but how can we help them in edging out their competition status?
Yeah. And I think that can be so on so many levels. Do we want to do the cognitive? And I would ask any coach listening, ask your kids if you're squared away. Are you squared away in how you grip the bar? Do you grip the bar pinkies first, understanding that that changes the way that you lift the weight with the brain? So do you roll pinky to finger, or do you do finger to pinky? How squared away are you? Do you know what your weights are? Do you know what your weekly load has been? Do your coaching staffs know what your 1 meter per second VBT is? Are your eccentrics stronger than your concentrics? We say it in practice, oh yeah,
Mhm.
eccentric stronger, but then when you pull up someone's workout logs, you don't really see that. And so again, I agree with you of making sure that we can take some of these research concepts, hold people accountable, but also move the field forward as practitioners.
Mhm. I've previously spoke about this on the podcast, but I've essentially created this Excel sheet where I keep all my research that I do, and then I put into categories like, is it applicable? Like, what aspects of this research is real life applicable to different sports as well? Like, is it just one very niche area of sport that I can get with it? Okay, does that warrant me investigating and spending so much time really diving into it, or is it good in theory but it's not practical, so then it just goes bin.
And I think in any case, there's always a sliver of truth. Isometrics are good. Yep. Isometrics should dominate 90% of your programming. Nope. Force plates are good. Yeah. I think that if you're not using plates and you're writing a program for someone intentionally, then you're not doing a service to them. But as we've alluded to earlier in our conversation offline, just because you have a mass moving and momentum, impulse, power, whatever camp you want to fall into, I might have someone whose mass doesn't change over the course of 4 years, but they can certainly be different with nutrition and intervention. So it's very important that when we look, like you said in your research, you don't get myopic with it. You don't just go and say,
Mhm.
oh, this is the only way, because everything we do is a combination of subdomains that have to come together from the EQ side. So emotional, how's the person viewing this challenge or threat? To the IQ of the physics and the moment arms, and understanding what's that task, what's that specific thing that they need to do, and understanding that Ferraris suck in the snow. Ferraris
Mhm.
are terrible snow plows. It doesn't mean that you should take Ferraris and mount the same kit that you've done the last 100 times on your 250 or whatever truck you have. Like, you need to understand that domain, and that's where taking the time to go do the book knowledge, do the research, and okay, what are the domains, but what are some of the exploits that maybe some of the gurus? I deal with a lot of gurus across a lot of
Oh.
different fields. Um, to step back and kind of look at it at a micro level. A good example is in the sport of lacrosse. The average male on the team was 165 to like 175. The ACC, which is a conference, kind of like the Premier League, if you will,
Mhm.
of college lacrosse. Those guys are 185. Now, you come from a football background. What is the most? What is the highest speed, most violent position in football? Arguably, maybe your safeties, maybe your DBs, and those guys are 195 to 205. And specifically in the
Mhm.
sport of lacrosse, I remember saying to Coach Shea, I was like, "Why don't we just build a bunch of safeties and corners?" So that became our directive. And if you go look at the body weight of the team, lifting 4 days a week, having a hypertrophy cycle, combining it with the proper energetics. And all of a sudden now you look at the team, average weight's 203. The amount of random drug tests that we had at Yale in
Mhm.
those years was incredible. Random. It was very random that the guys got off the bus and their arms looked right after a little arm farm, that they would just be like, hey, come on over here. Right. And taking pride in that and understanding that, yeah, you looked great there, for the national championship, but what have you been doing the last 12 months? That was the final culmination of the product. But that was an exploit because the sport of lacrosse, and I've told it, I've said it, I've been on teams, they don't lift. They're not known for being eating barbells and chalk and that. But I think that if you look at from kind of the Yale era on, go 2016 to present day, look at how much bigger these athletes are. At the time of this recording, the national championship is going to be right around the corner. Athletes are bigger. The floor has been risen. So the game will rise as well. But as a strength coach, and kind of everybody has a little bit of a scientific aspect to their craft, what's the exploit? What's the conditioning done in cycling that can then help, say your strikers? What are some of the things in tactical that you can do in decision making to help your midfielders? You know what I mean? So that's where we always have to be looking forward, but have a realistic understanding of, is this practical or not? And what's the thing that's going to make the biggest impact?
100%. And to go back to a point that we were speaking about earlier that you mentioned just now, is not just being strict with the same sport. Like, have volleyball athletes coming in, have volleyball coaches coming in, have these different elements of sports, because you're only as good as your movement patterns allow you to be. So if you get someone else that's used to more to different movement patterns, how can that help you progress your athletes as well?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's where specificity, for better or worse, has really, really damaged the career. Because 'cause we'll get someone. I always pick on track athletes, run fast, lean left. They get so specific that they become brittle, and again, thinking of kind of the aperture of a camera, we wanna zero in on our target tasks, but we also have to zoom back out to say, "Okay, well, you can't be so specific that you roll your ankle anytime you cut." And so what we try to do when we talk about training is that there's physical literacy that everyone has to do. Just like every mathematician still can write a sentence. Every English major can do 1 plus 1. Maybe they can't do trigonometry, but there's certain fundamental movement literacies that I don't care who you are. If any of them degrade to the point of now they're deficient, it's going to have a secondary level impact to the performance that you're trying to do. And it may take 6 months. I think we talked about this earlier, is that it may not hurt you now, but once you start lifting heavier weights or start running faster, that's where that exploit's going to become your weak point and make you the most vulnerable.
100%. I think as well the thing that has always stuck with me. I'm from a multi-sport background. I did football, surf, I did rugby, I did some running, not fast whatsoever, but I still learned how to run. And by being multi-sport, you kind of get movement patterns and you they switch over without you even thinking about it. That makes you that bit better of an athlete. Like now, anytime that I pick up a sport or I do a sport with friends and families, like I can just pick up quickly because I'm aware of these movements. So for me, it's always like originally you should start multi-sport and then sort of phase out into your special sport or specific sport.
Yeah, and we know this to be true because young kids, athletes, or just call them just young kids, they learn languages earlier in life easier. So there's this open
Mhm.
opportunity. So the brain, biologically and kind of developmentally, they're primed to learn. So that's why they always talk about. We were at Yale, the School of Language. You have to know 5 languages to even be considered. Some people speak 16 languages, which is a whole separate topic because I want to know when they get mad which language they pick. Um, but their rule.
Hey, I could shed some light.
There you go. There you go. You got 3. Your goal was to get 3 languages before 5. So 3 before 5 was their mantra, that if you can teach someone 3 languages before 5, the 4th, 5th, 6th, as many as you want, there's something that happens at the brain of a kid who's multilingual. And again, European nations are way better than the US in making sure that there's a full conduit of understanding both, the wording structure, but extracting meaning, action, and feelings from it. Well, on physical stuff, it's the same way. When we talk about movement, there's engrams in the brain. Dr. Kramer talks about this all the time. Is that early young development, the cutting, the changing of direction, and I think Charles Poliquin mentioned it as well. Why do you want them to do jujitsu and wrestling at younger ages? Well, reactive strength, me pushing against you, is a type of strength. Me pushing, you pulling, me pushing, pulling, going into a third plane at the earlier ages, if their brain can figure that out, that's why wrestlers tend to be really great in football, especially in the offensive
Mhm.
line. So ideally, yes, you want to have some football experience in high school, but if you can give me a wrestler, soccer, or basketball player that knows how to move their feet, that wiring has already been laid down ahead of time for you. So I think you're exactly right with get in a fluid. So again, get into gymnastics, get into swimming, get into water polo, get into wrestling, grappling, anything where there's push pull with a bat and ball, where someone's throwing the ball at you, but then golf where you're hitting this object and you're doing it at the end of an instrument. All of that goes into your motor and proprioception kind of wiring that, yeah, now you get into 14, 15, your body's trying to figure out, do you need me to be a Spartan warrior or a banker? And again,
Mhm.
that's where strength coaches, if we can lay down some of the training density from the weight room, we can really have lasting impacts, not only in the short term of their career, but long term as well.
100%. And the long term as well. I've came up with this theory really early on in my career, but it's obviously true the more I read about it. Is like the more movement based activity that you do and the earlier you can get into strength and conditioning programs, the easier that growth spurts happen and you're actually in control of your body and you're aware of where it is in time, depending how fast you're growing. I'm 5'8", I'm not that tall, but growing through my growing pains and being the height I am now, I was able to adapt a little bit quicker because I got introduced to S&C when I was 13.
Yeah, and I think that when you want to, I think your theory is correct, but you want to prove it. There's a device called a neurocom. So it's basically a moving
Mhm,
floor where you go in, and there's visual stimulus, and again, stripping the body down into just a machine. Your brain is the computer, and you've got these sensory things. So the pressure in your feet, the pressure, understanding how come I can give you a hockey stick, and then I can also give you a golf club, and just have you hold it and just spin it around in your hand. You can tell me which object's which. Well, how does that happen? So your touch matters, your visual. So near far shift, especially with screens, if you're spending all the time at 6 inches to 8 inches from your face, well, now shifting 60 feet
mhm.
out or 100 yards out, that's a learned thing. And so we can actually measure that. So I think you're spot on. And it's just a question now as a coach, what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah,
We can,
it goes back to that movement literacy, which I kind of want to get back to.
yeah.
But prior, I so English is my second language, and so I'm originally from Portugal. And you're 100% right. The earlier you can introduce languages to kids, the easier it is for them to learn. Again, I'm very fluent. People wouldn't realize I'm actually Portuguese, but because I got used to growing up with that language, hearing the different tonalities of it and bouncing in between English and Portuguese. Like I'm still fluent in Portuguese. I have to speak to my granny.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't speak a link of English, but it's helped me like sort of keep both languages while still being able to think and process at a fast enough rate that I can hold like a decent conversation with both.
Yeah. And that I think makes you more aware because I can tell you right now, I've never met your granny, but if she starts flipping in Portuguese, I'll know when she's pissed. I know when she's happy. And so I think that's another thing for coaches. A lot of time, and I laugh, you just got your CSCS, you got all the letters after your name. You're going to tell me about all the different limbs and this, that, and eccentric, da, 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 da. But if you actually coach on the floor, most of our listening needs to come from body language and tone and inflection. How you feeling? Good, right? But now they're down, they're dejected, they're looking to the side, and I never appreciated that until during the time when I had my cancer and I couldn't train athletes, but I got to train canines. I actually got my CSCS in dog handling. So, and trying to
Nice.
train a freshman how to back squat and a poodle how to sit, it's harder than you think. But the difference when you train canine is if you're a jerk, and I think sometimes there's a little bit of a complex. Sometimes you get that 5'10",
It's
185
the egos.
pound male with the ego. Do that to a German Shepherd, you'll do it once because it's basically a chainsaw with four legs, and they will let you know if they think you're being fair. But yet, when you're coaching, and I steal this from Michael Ellis, who's a world famous dog trainer, they have to love the work and the process more than the outcome. And if you think of that, and we think about that for our athletes, do they love the weight room? Roughly 115 workouts in the offseason in American football. Soccer, say it's year round, they're playing for a team. If you only love the outcome, so playing the game, you're going to struggle. And we've seen that because, again, there's so much preparatory resilience and training that needs to go on to make sure that you can have a 10, 15-year career or a 17-game schedule. So that's always stuck with me. And probably the biggest change in my coaching was I was always very organized. You're going to do this.
Mhm.
This makes sense, logic and reason, but having way more appreciation for the affect of the individual. And the individual today is going to be different tomorrow. An individual walk in, how you feeling? Feeling good. Force plate numbers are through the roof. We're good to go. We can train high heavy force or high heavy power. Got into a fight with, girlfriend.
Mhm.
Sudden change, right? And just like an emergency room, you don't know what's going to come in that door, but you need to be prepared in your preparation for the toolbox of, okay, this is a light strength day. This is a heavy day. And so flexible nonlinear becomes kind of the superior training paradigm because anybody that does block training these days, again, I get it, logistical comfort. I'm going to do this 4 week program. But can you imagine if you went to the hospital and they're like, for 4 weeks, we're doing hip surgery?
Mhm.
But I have a sniffle. I have a sinus infection. Yep, we're taking that hip out. You'd laugh at that, and be right. Like everybody that needed hip surgery, it'll be great. It'll be the best plan ever. But then if you're missing those other ones, you can either A, do damage, or B, not prepare them, or C, straight up, just it won't work. Like it's not bad or good in the sense of further development. But in that moment, it was an inert kind of training stimulus.
I agree. I'm always very much, again, as soon as an athlete comes in through the door, a fist bump straight away. and that gives me a lot. If they just like give a little half-ass, I'm like, okay, we'll monitor that. What's wrong? But again, I also think that monitoring comes from the way you speak with them, and again, like you mentioned, your body language. I'm very much. They're not sports scientists. They're not strength and conditioning coaches. So although I've got a degree and I know all my science lingo, they don't care.
No,
They're not. They don't give a flying fuck. So I'm not going to say, oh yeah, today we're working on your RPE scale and we're lifting XYZ for XYZ for this reason.
no.
They don't need to know. Just hey, we're doing squats today. We're working at about 50% of your max. Let's go.
Yeah, and my expectation is as a coach, I can pull you offline and say, "Show me breakdown, give me your justifications." And again, people will say there's not one way to do it. Right, but there's also millions of ways to not do it. And when you go
Hmm.
through and you think about just with reps and sets, there's 10 to the 65th power of combinations that you can do. Now add exercise or any of the other acute program variables of selection and equipment and those kind of stuff. There's limitless choices. But just imagine if we had GPS, they're paying you to go somewhere to a championship. And are you going to be spending your time in the woods, in eccentric land or, concentric only land or isometric land? No, like get on the bus, let's go. And they're expecting you to be squared away enough to drive it. But then when you're on the bus, you can't be weird. Like, and I think a lot of
Hmm.
the coaches that get into the science and physics, they're just weird. Like they don't know how to hold a conversation. You mentioned at your football program, the first thing that the guys want to hear is what's up. And they're going to dap you up, talk about their day, get fired up. If you immediately launch into some novel about impulse and braking force, you're going to lose credibility. And that's where I think, you start seeing that like some of these people keep sliding off into the sports analytic role or the sports scientist role. I was like, man, I didn't know that was a thing. I must have missed the email because last time I checked, you need to know these things as a coach, but don't carve
Hmm.
yourself off to be 3 floors away that you're going to go and monitor the load, but yet you have no expertise in kind of
Hmm.
what that data means. What's the context, you know?
100%. And data is only as good as what you can justify it to your athletes or the program.
Yeah.
Like, again, you can run a 420, cool, but does that actually mean anything while you're playing?
Right.
Like, it's good to have, obviously. You're fucking flying, but does that actually make you a good athlete for your sport?
Yeah. And again, getting a 35-inch vertical instead of a 34-inch vertical has some questionable amount of impact. But being an 18-inch vertical to a 19 earlier on in the development probably has a greater. So, but we have this composite that makes up the athlete that you have to know that and you have to know the context. And when you do testing, and I hate hearing the following sentence. Well, we looked at the data, we can fix you. We can whatever. So now you're the fear monger. You're trying to plant that little like mind virus that at any moment they feel a twinge in their hamstring, they feel a twinge in their whatever, that you're going to say, I told you so. And so that drives me nuts. And again, what you want is the team to work together and have the context. There were times where people were like, all their force plate numbers are down. This is bad. These numbers are going down. And I was like, well, but what block are they in? Well, what do you mean? Are they in a hypertrophy cycle? Are we in spring ball? Well, I don't know. That's not my job. No, your job, if you're going to represent data, which means you're representing the individual or department, you need to have context. And I'm going to tell this story, and my buddy's going to get mad because I know he wanted to tell it. But uh, if you don't know context, don't talk. And why I say that is that the story goes, soccer team going on the pitch. And so they're looking at GPS data. GPS is common, right? You probably had some guests on here talking about GPS. Well, sit down, have a coach to celebrate. One of the athletes just set an all-time PR with the GPS. They hit a new max velo. Velo's great. And so they go and they sit with the coach and they tell that, this player now has just achieved an all-time PR. And the coach looks at them like with that funny face and was like, what do you mean? They're like, oh, well, so-and-so just set a PR. And he goes, when? Well, last Wednesday. Uh, Wednesday, they got hurt, blew out their ACL. Well, what they didn't realize is that the athlete, even though they scored the PR, it was because they were on the gator going to the hospital. So the gator actually set the PR, not the individual. So cautionary tales from the trenches is know your context, because now think about it. Is that sport coach ever going to trust that you know what's going on? Now, again, was there malintent? No. But again, that's why when I laugh, when I hear someone say, I want to be a data scientist or I want to be a sport, analyst, you got to know all domains, because the minute that you meet that sport coach, you can lose their trust in a minute. And that's my biggest fear right now with all the gurus and all the experts, is that coaches aren't dumb. They may not be great at certain things like load management. They may not be great, understanding science, but they've been doing it a long time. And I think that, again, we've been playing sports a long time without sports technologies and things like that. And so it's incumbent on, the directors and the kind of lead people to make sure that
Mm.
all your ducks in a row, because you have to represent that performance team. And if you're not, it's very hard to get them back.
100%. And again, I always look at this industry as in it's not strength and conditioning, it's not sports science, it's not sports psychology. We are all borrowing a bit from each element of it. And again, the effectiveness of a coach is knowing when to go ham, knowing to back off, knowing okay, he's having a shit day. Let's figure out why. Like let's be human for a second and realize okay, he's also a human or she's a human. Let's talk about okay, what's going on in your day to day that you're not having energy. Did you drink? Any fights with family members, friends? How's that going on? If all of these tie in, and then you can push, and then you can do different elements to better their performance. But you can also better their performance just by letting them move during a session. If they're not up to push their PRs that day, let's move.
Yeah.
Let's just move.
Yeah, nothing wrong with 3x5 hugs and you're beautiful. Nothing with, 3x5. Let's get on the roll and talk about life. And I think as coaches, early on, who do you train? They'll say a soccer player, a goalie.
Mhm.
Well, a little higher level coach is going to say soccer player, goalie, All American, international champion, has whatever force plate number, has whatever GPS number. Senior coach, this is a father, this is a husband, this is someone who's gone through extensive rehab. This is a person who it's make or break. Oh, and now I'm going to get into those other layers. And that's an important stepping stone in your career, where you have to be able to zoom out macro. What's going on? What's the
Mhm.
reality? What's the real situation? And either, like you said, you need to know enough. You need to know enough in each domain, but also, especially in my role, I might be working with 5 or 6 other people with a client. What's the nutritionist in California think, and the physical therapist in Texas, and the sports analytics guy over here or over there? All right, well, how do we get on a call and have meaningful conversations? Because at the end of the day, we have one specific task: hit a ball, throw a pitch, make a tackle, do whatever the thing is, and making sure that everybody's pointed in the right direction, to get the best results.
The best example I've got of this, and I've spoke to multiple people on the team on this podcast, is the UFC Performance Institute. It's led by Gavin, and I've spoke to Becky and Olivia, and the way that they bounce between each department is like it's so fundamentally sound that again they've got athletes who don't always speak English, they don't always are aware of what's happening, but and within themselves they're so good at communicating that all their athletes know where to go for the exact same aspect that they're needing to work on. And that to me again was taught to me by Coach Mack, but it was really fundamentally drilled into me speaking to those guys where they're again they've got athletes from everywhere. And not only is it not the same sport all the time, like you can have taekwondo, you can have kickboxing, you can have boxing, you can have wrestling, jiu-jitsu. Like there's so many different domains in there, but they are all so communicative with each other that they know exactly who to send to where.
Yeah. And I credit Duncan French with a lot of that, because he came out of the Yukon pipeline of the early 2000s with Dr. Kramer. And so, Duncan has a PhD. He's trying to coordinate this, giant effort here at UFC. But Duncan can coach now. Like if he gets in the rack, he can go and do it himself. And I've always appreciated Duncan, coming out of that kind of Kramer tree. And you think about that time, you had Eric Cressy, you had Andrew Hootie, you had, Pat Dixon, Marish, Volek, you had titans of our field came out of a very, very concentrated time. But that stems from Jerry Martin too. Like people should take the time to go back and learn the history of what was created in Yukon during that time. Because Coach Martin, and Dr. Kramer will talk about this, he would go give a presentation. Coach Martin would turn around and say, okay, now that we know the science, how do we use it to our advantage? So you had this catalyst, like a catalyst of the injury of the industry for years, where there's just stuff that isn't written down, that isn't talked about, but you go ask Pat, or you go ask Joe Staub, or you go ask anybody that was in that time, if you could have been a fly in that room, that was history. But now what's the
Mhm.
manifestation of that once that seed's been planted? You have the UFC Performance Institute that's a global entity. And again, as it relates to fighting and combat, I don't know, and maybe you could help me. I mean, is there anything in Europe or globally that compares? What they've built there kind of is the kind of gold standard. And I would encourage anybody listening. I don't know, man, if you've seen the pamphlet that they wrote, the UFC handbook, where when you want to talk about the standard for understanding your athlete profile, they have got it down to by weight class, by power class. I don't know if you can see that download. Yeah, they go through and it's just explaining. I can send you a copy of it as well. But where they go through and they break down what's the physiology, what are the bioenergetics, how many strikers versus grapplers. Like I want to say it's close to 100 pages. And that's just fighting. So if you're at a university with 30 teams or 15 teams, that in theory means you need to have 15 books 100 pages long. So what does that look like for golf? What does that look like for
Mhm.
a triathlete? And again, what's the surface level knowledge versus what's the really deep knowledge to go in and say, wow, the bicarbonate buffering system is really important. How can I leverage that for offensive linemen, compared to what I would do with my wrestlers? And that's really where the magic happens, where you can kind of really find opportunities within the athlete composite to be able to train people up or recruit differently.
I kind of want to back up a little bit and talk about the movement literacy that you were talking about and how you identify it and break it down into sort of different elements that apply to different sports.
Yeah. So obviously we've talked about pushing and pulling. So your understanding, so I don't know if you know the concept of, we just talked about this at the center of the center of pressure, the center of force,
Mhm.
and the center of mass and how they interact. And so understanding how that cone moves. And so when I ask you to run, that's you heard a stimulus and then you fired your muscles off. But understanding we're not like frogs. Like if you take your fingers right now, whoop, here you go. Take your fingers right now, snap. So if try that for me, do it. You can do that. So our muscles can't do that. So now take your finger off. Can you clap with your middle finger, index finger? You can't. You can't get enough speed. So yep. So if you go here, you can't do it. But we as animals, we can't be like a frog where we can load up and slingshot out. We need to pass through all the motor unit pathways, send huge charges, electrical charges, and get everything to fire. We have to train that. And so that's when you're in control. But then secondarily, if you step off a box, now the ground's coming at you. So you might be very strong, but you're not good at reacting. That's a thing. And so just thinking about forward and back. I mean, think about it. Why in the human body can we lean 8 degrees forward, 4.5 degrees backwards, but then we fall over? Kind of weird. You only have a 12.5 degree. And then left and right, you have 8, so 16. So why evolutionarily do we have this kind of small cone platform where we can lock all of our joints, lock all of the muscles, and we can stand? But yet sport, we're asking them to lean and go out to the side or do a kick slide or do some sort of rotation. It gets complex. And so to me, moving against other things or reacting to other things is kind of the two pathways that you pull. And then on both of those, they duplicate of, okay, now I have to react to something and I have to do it 10 times. Might be super good. I can do it 10 times. Go to the 12th time, my strategy goes to hell. And then now I have a shortened time. And I think for me, whenever I hear people say injury prevention,
Mm.
okay, we got a lot, again, gurus in injury prevention, but injuries haven't gone down. Arguably the most science and technology in that space and money spent in that space. We can't crack the code. So we like to think about injury mitigation. On every collision, there's a hammer and the nail. Be the hammer.
Mm.
And so that's the best way to prevent injuries is that, again, injuries may go down, but that really means you've given the injuries to the other team. And that's the role of the strength coach. We can't be strength therapists. So what are the things that we can mitigate again so that on the 15th collision we're in a good spot? So that's really where resiliency, and then I think kind of the last phase of the literacy is the cognitive domain. So again, I mentioned Mark Stevenson, again, his history speaks for himself. But I'll tell you what, when you go in and you think you got something figured out, he's going to challenge you in the critical thinking, really critical thinking. So if I asked you to do a rest set for strength, what would you say to me? You say maybe 3 by 5 and 90 seconds, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, really? Like,
It depends. It depends.
but you can pick, but you're gonna tell me a time, probably. You're gonna tell me a time. Mark, his challenge is, okay, well, what if instead of time, it was you need to do a cognitive task? You can go when you're done with the task. Well, suddenly now I'm gonna do, say, 5 triples. You're gonna have 3 minutes rest, but you can't go until you do this math problem. Count back from 1,000 by 7. When you get to 300, then you can go. If you mess up, so when you're just verbally, you're counting out loud, well, now what's executive functioning? And then what's recall? I can line up a deck of cards, 3 cards. All right, Manny, you're up at the rack. Look at the cards, turn around. Cool. Start your set. How many black colors were there? Oh, I forgot. Oh, I was looking at the numbers. I wasn't looking at the suits. I was looking at the colors. I wasn't looking at the orientation of the cards. So that's where, again, you think that you've reached the kind of pinnacle of training. There's so much more, and so pushing it to a whole nother level of being able to really push the body, that's the literacy we're talking about. And I think that
Mm,
even the stuff we've talked about, that never ends. So you could have an elite athlete with 10 years training experience, but they can't touch their toes. They can't do a pull up. So I would encourage that, yes, we have a target. We know what we're going for, but left and right, we never, 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 never get so narrow in our base that the pyramid falls over.
mhm. The most shocking one to me was I asked an athlete to do just a forward roll, couldn't do it.
Mhm.
I was like, "You're a national athlete. You cannot do a forward roll."
Yep.
Like that to me, it was like it really narrowed in the thing of like not everyone's able to move the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just say that, the athlete's probably gonna say, "I'm a cyclist. Why do I need to know? Why this?" And again, you don't wanna go crazy with it, but if there's any chance that there's a thing, and I always, revert back to, say, rugby. Oh, there's rugby form and but also you're getting up off the ground. I can't remember if it was Eric
Mhm,
Cressy or Dan John. One of their workouts was lay on the ground, stand up, get on your belly, stand up. If you go watch an NFL game or like the All Blacks, how they interact with the ground after contact is very different than people that fall down and look like a sack of potatoes. And it's painful. Like you watch them get up and there's just and so there's this body hardening that happens through contact that, again, how much do you need to do? You can argue about it, but there definitely is a minimal dose that you
mhm,
now have lost that ability to get off the ground, roll on the ground, fall safely. And in a sport where that may happen 1 or 2 times, it would be silly that if that's the 1 or 2 times that takes you out because you were so
yep.
focused on, oh, it just won't happen. That's not great coaching.
100%. I can shed some light on this for you. So I was a rugby athlete. I go up to national trials and all that stuff. Shoulder dislocations did not help at all. Kind of career ending. But we're not sour. We move on.
Mhm.
We so essentially a lot of what we train is from floor up, from floor up, and we go side, face down, face up, and then we just get into these positions and we try and get up, and it kind of ties into our speed training a little bit. So essentially, we'd start on a line, we'd go just a normal stand up position, take off, and then we'd go knees up, sprint. Then we'd go on your butt, up, sprint, on your belly, up, sprint, back, side, sprint. Like we'd hit all of these, and we got comfortable getting up, like pushing ourselves, no matter which position we were in, turning to push, just so we can bounce off the floor quick enough to then make the next ruck, make the next tackle. And then the really tricky one is when you get in a collision with someone and you fall backwards and you kind of have to do that back roll push up to stand. Now that takes a lot of strength and mobility and flexibility, all that just to do that one movement, but you can get up and into the next action so much quicker.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of you have to be uncomfortable in these positions through training these movements.
Right. And I mean, let's be honest. If you think back in the history, where did gymnastics originate from? Do people know? It's from combat. If you look at through that time and you start looking at there's a nice paper out of Kentucky. So it's the history of Army physical preparedness and training. It's not the exact title, but you can look and find it. But it's about 500 pages, got a green front cover. But you go back to the Turner gyms and the kind of stuff out of Germany. And why was it? It was, well, because during that time with warfare, you needed to roll, tumble, climb, throw things, i.e., javelin. You need to be able to do these activities. And so much of athletics came out of the original need for making sure that you stayed ready. And I think that staying ready probably is more important than trying to peak in one specific thing, short of the acute, like you're 6 months out, you need to. But that is just such a cautionary tale of making sure that you're not so specific that you're frail. You don't have to be elite at it. Now, I know I work with my soccer teams, and when we were at Yale, the coach was like, "Oh, I don't want them to be big and bulky." I'm not saying as a soccer player on the pitch, you need to be super strong. You can't be weak. Weak defined as
Mhm.
you can't squat your body weight. If you can squat your body weight, I will leave you alone. But when you have an 18 to 19-year-old male that doesn't have the neuromuscular control to put a bar on their back, however you want to do it, go up and down with their body weight, that is frail. And so now we had guys get to 1.5. Well, they get to double. All right. Well, now the research is out and personal experience. You get to double. You've exhausted that kind of force pipeline. Well, now what are you doing at a meter per second? Are you using any of the flywheel kind of eccentric stuff where we're understanding the brakes? Throwing on the brakes keeps you on the field. Acceleration gets you recruited, and you have to make sure that those two stay in balance. So not uncommon at Yale, and Coach Tofi, I think you know him. He had everybody. You get to 1.5 double. Okay, well now you're in the meter per second crew. I want to know, rerun that 1 RM at a meter per second, and conversely on the flip side, let's hit you on a Desmotech or a K box or Exafly, whatever your wheel thing is. And the coaches were like, well, but that's not what we've always been. No, you've graduated. What got you to the top isn't going to keep you at the top. But breaking it down into simple understanding, steps that they saw positive results at a body weight level at 1.5. Well, but coach, now we need to, obviously we don't want to go down again. But we need to now focus on these other domains to stay up top. And so that's really kind of how, when we think about keeping that literacy, that's how you can maintain it, but also prioritize towards the task as you get further down the development line.
Yeah, that's something that I kind of want to get into is that meter per second rule that you've said you graduate from. So you do your 1 RM, you can do then body weight easily enough, and then you graduate that to your sort of meters per second. If you explain how that went about and how it's actually working in real life now.
Yeah, so we know that when we think about strength, everyone's, how strong is too strong? Where does it start and stop? And again, when we say these numbers, we're particularly thinking about team sports, power sports. I don't claim that this will apply to marathon runners, but thinking about in your main kind of powerhouse sports, we get them strong. We get them to double. Now, my buddy at the time, Dan Schaefer, who I mentioned down at Florida State with Coach Jost, started experimenting with GymAware and Tendos way
Mm.
back. Like we're talking 2010-ish, 11-ish, before it was cool. And so what you notice is that, wow, they are getting stronger, but not in the way that you would think. The numbers are going up at a meter per second, but what we're starting to see is that maybe they can do 30% of their max. Well, now they can do 50% of their max. And then where's power? You can argue wherever, but call it 60%. Around 60% was where they started to not go up. All right. So now I think of that as a transmission. And what the sport coaches really see is that first step explosion. And again, power and speed are percentages of your max. But if we go to grade it out, what we see is that there's a huge carryover. And I'd love, if there's a scientist listening, you could probably extrapolate that meter per second. The time to extend the hips is probably about 0.3 of a second. Well, go look at out of the blocks. So some of Ralph Mann's work and some of the other track stuff, you have this kind of amortization or coupling time where you have a certain small window to apply force. Sport is played at roughly a meter per second in your start, stop, continue kind of sports. And so in that first step, the coaches were right. I mean, sport coaches are great at seeing patterns. This is good. This is bad. But what we found out was we got a lot more bang for our buck by making sure that, yes, let's get you strong. And again, teach you Olympic lifting, teach you meter per second stuff, whatever. But as soon as we crack that 1.5, plyos become really important. And the way that you accelerate becomes a huge valuable tool. And especially in a sport like football or like a rugby prop, The guys that
Hmm.
like to lift heavy probably don't like moving fast, and or they'll do it begrudgingly with little enthusiasm, but when now you put a number to it, you can go in and say, "Yeah, no, you've graduated now to I want you to rerun the table and push that meter per second up as high as you can." But some magic really happens, and we joked that, Dan was the one who first kind of brought it to my attention. We called it Schaefer's Law, and I wrote a blog post about it, and I don't think it's up anymore, but I know one of his students 10 years later was like, "Oh, have you heard of Schaefer's Law?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, the meter per second of your body weight." And he's like, "Tom." So he calls me in and like, I was like, "Yeah, but it's true. We did it at Yale." I mean, one of our top linebackers, at 230 pounds, he squatted close to 500. So even in excess of double, he was a strong cat. But then we had a meter per second and it wasn't very high. I want to say it was in the low 200s. But then seeing a 230-pound individual then move, I think 365 or 370 at a meter per second, the bar is crying because it's snapping so hard. He goes out and leads the nation in FCS tackles and sacks. It's just different. And so that's, the difference between a pickup truck and a Lamborghini. Both have 400 horsepower. Well, how they express it through that meter per second band is critical. And it's an easy way for coaches. If you go and you see that someone is strong, but their meter per second is like 20% of their max or 15% of their max, clean that up 3-4 weeks, just get the pistons firing in unison. You can really see huge, change and turnover as it relates to on-field performance.
100%. This is actually something that I've been tinkering with. I've got a sprint athlete, and we're working on his horizontal sort of starting off the blocks, um, and it's fascinating. So when we started, he was like snapping through, and obviously we need to get that moving quick. But it's that thing of how quick can you go from point A to then point B. But it's kind of like you're going this way to then up, and it's the forces are so there's so much force going on that you need your highways and your country roads. That's the best way that I've heard being explained. It's you need some athletes to be fast. Their braking powers might not be great, but we can work on that. So you need to then fill up buckets in these athletes of, okay, you're a slower athlete, you're maybe an O line, D line, but you still need a certain level of speed. You still need a certain level of power. So let's put some of these extra things in your bucket so that you can keep up with the demands of the sport.
Yeah, and I would say my 3 go-tos for the power athletes, 1, what is your back squat? And again, whatever it is, whether you 1RM it or, you get, 2 or 3, but you have a high confidence of what that maximal force is. What's their meter per second, as it relates to the max, but then also to their body. And then the third one is on the front squat. You have 10 reps as fast as you can, and you're going to have to strap it down. 10 reps as fast as you can. What is that weight? And so that
Hmm.
what is that weight? If you have those 3 values, then I can get pretty good insight into what's the next lever we're going to pull in the next training block, to be able to kind of make you better.
Yeah. What would be some of your rep schemes to develop these different elements?
So strength, my favorite all time. And again, it deserves a podcast in and of itself with Dr. Kramer. The most aggressive rep scheme that I know that when we ran for strength that consistently produced 80 to 120 pounds increase in 1RM per month. So like 300 pounds to 400 pounds, 400 pounds to 500 pounds, was Dr. Kramer's
Oh,
plan. He wrote while with the Army. And again, there's a whole backstory on that, but it was a pyramid of 642 246 on a Tuesday. And I'll give you more background on that, where the 6 is set at 85, the 4 is at 90, the 2 is at 95, the 2 is at 95, 4 at 90, and 6 at 85. Now just think about that. That's a bear, and it's 5 minutes rest in between. So it's up and down, but every set is auto regulated. So when they go in, you got to make sure they never fail, but you have to go. And what you'll see is guys will talk about being exhausted on the backside of the pyramid, very similar to like almost a conditioning effect, but it's on the nervous system.
mhm.
That whole pyramid I just explained takes about 45 minutes just to run that one set. So you go through,
Wow.
and at the doubles, you're getting 4 exposures. And if you take your Prilipin table with the numbers I just gave you, what you're going to see is you're going to completely saturate your high threshold motor units of 95%. You're going to saturate the 8 reps above 90, and you're going to saturate the 12 reps in the 85 band. So from a mega dose of strength to the CNS, that's the most intense that I've seen. And where the safety valve on that is that you go in and say you're supposed to hit 4, but you hit 3. auto regulate down the following two. So reps divided by 30 plus one times the weight you moved. There's your max. Recalculate it and go. If you drop outside of 10% throughout the course of the set, you terminate the set. They're tired. They're cooked. And you might get 6 4 2 2, and then they're cooked because we've now dropped outside that zone. So that's pretty incredible. And then what's even more incredible is you take, so that's on a Tuesday. Wednesday is off. Thursday you do 5 5 3, and you do the five at 87, or no, sorry, at 85, and then the three at 90. So if you think about within a 72-hour period, how much load I just told you, um, it's just a huge dose of strength. And I remember asking Dr. Kramer, I said, that just seems like so many reps at such high intensity. And he was like, just do the plan. Like, you have to realize thousands of reps, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars went into this rep scheme. Just shut up and do it. Because I was all excited that we went up like 60 to 80 pounds in the 1RM from January to August. And it was like, oh, that's cute.
Mhm.
That's cute. That's nice. Well, why don't you try this scheme? And I remember just asking that. And he said, don't think of it as one lift and then another lift. That is a squat session broken up over 72 hours. And if you run it like that,
Right.
it's a little bit different. Now, Mondays and Fridays, there's accessory work. You're trying to prep the body, but you don't actually get very sore from it. But it's very demanding, and you have to use recovery tools like float, and you have to use these others. But whether we were at Yale or in the private sector, that thing works. So you can get strong in a hurry. I mean, and it's pretty incredible that we now go use that across the board with any of our strength athletes. But you shouldn't take more than 6 months to get someone up to 1.5 or double for their strength numbers when you have kind of the appropriate pyramid schemes to put in place.
So, would you do any type of like conditioning work, or again, I don't like rehab work, like injury prevention work, so mitigation work in between these sets, or like a cognitive task, or just straight?
You sit and shut your mouth, and you let the body recover, and you try to take that huge fight or flight response and lower it down. I mean, you could get kind of high speed and put a Zephyr or some sort of HRV tool on them to see. You could, in theory, and then instead of giving them 5 minutes, when their heart rate and when their HRV is back down. But that plan, and again, thinking of context, that plan is, I have someone with a 300-pound back squat. I need to get them up in a hurry. Where we go into the
Mhm.
next phase is that, okay, they're now living at double their body weight, but we're going to do 4 sets of 10. They can do it regularly. So say 4 sets of 10 at 80% of max. And why that 80 is important. In the Shimano papers, they talk about real strength and where those rep schemes came from. Most percentages came from weightlifters. Most percentages come from historical texts. But the Shimano paper out of Yukon really kind of showed both men and women what's possible. So that 4 sets of 10 at 80, that 80% on 10 reps takes probably about a minute to a minute and a half to execute all 10 reps for time. If you can do that, yeah, now I'm going to throw a cognitive task in. And that's really where I get excited now, is that magical things happen. You get very, very high levels of lactic acid or hydrogen ions start going into the brain, affecting the synapses and the astrocytes and how it communicates. You start questioning life. You're talking to the devil. You're thinking whatever. Try to be focused. Yeah, no, that's where now you can get slick and you can say, okay, you can't do the next set until you do these math problems. You can't do these until you come off the neuro tracker and you're actually able to see the objects in space, and then you're done. So now guys, and especially at that level, they're ultra competitive. What do you mean? Well, you can't go. You can't do the next conditioning round until you do the following. And just knowing, is it recall? Is it executive functioning? Is it spatial? Is it colors? What's the thing that you're going to tax the brain in this stress state? That's where it can get really exciting. But the strength protocols in and of itself, just let it cook. And you're only going to have to run it for a couple of weeks in their career, and then you can get them up
Mhm.
there. And then you have, for accessories, you have Mondays and Friday to be able to do that. And then obviously, as part of their warm up, they'll do low backs. Like, we're never not doing those, but in that moment for those 45 minutes twice a week, you're all eyes are on and you're locked in on that task.
That sounds like it's so. Coach AJ talks a lot about the dark side and how you have to experience that as an athlete and as a coach to know exactly what you're putting out there as well. Gil Stevenson, who he essentially wrote the UKSCA accreditation manual, and he's got this conditioning workout, and it combines both lifting and that conditioning. So essentially, what you're doing is you're doing three clean pulls, and then on your fourth, you're doing a clean, just a clean, no jerk, just up into a full front squat. You're doing that as fast as you can and you can go for 30, 45 minute on. Again, if you're still able to keep your heart rate at a decent level, you up the weight, you up the time, and then you can up the weight as well. But you're only allowed to go back once your heart rate has started going into that green zone, and then you go again. So essentially, your rest is dependent on your heart rate recovery. So I don't program anything that I haven't done. So I've done it so many times now that I'm just like, this is hell. It is hell. Because like I'm lifting 80 kilograms clean pull to then one last clean for 30 seconds. And then I have to go again as soon as my heart rate goes to green. I'm just like, fuck.
Yeah.
You kind of hope that it doesn't go down that quick.
Yeah, and I love that idea of the dark side. And what you're talking about is you're not in control. And so athletes freak out when they are not in control. And so that whole experience, I think, especially again, when we talk about we've checked our boxes kind of in our main stuff, that's super important because how you handle that, you either embrace it and you love it, or it just freaks them out. And that's when we've seen people crumble. I think that the stress response in everybody is different. Can it be trained? Yeah, to a point, but there's a reason why, especially in military selection, it's called selection, not try really hard. Again, everybody tries hard, but there's a reason why, in SAS or in SEALs or things like that, there's a reason why there's such a high attrition rate. Because again, first, Mark will talk about how do you train mental toughness? You don't, you select it out. But now you're mentally tough. We get that. You're not going to quit, but can you cognitively perform? And there's a lot of papers that look at like right now, if I asked you to run a mile, would you do it? If I asked you right now, get up
Right.
and run a mile, you might try. Most guys, especially if you're a strength coach, like I'm not going to run a mile, but okay, good. So it's not that important to you to try. You're okay with, accepting that you can't do it or you won't do it. But if I'm like, hey, your family's going to die if you don't get up and run, well, suddenly everyone's like, well, the task didn't change, but your reward system and your value system is what's being challenged. And I think especially when you look at football, what are they trying to do every year? Talk about team, talk about us. You're trying to instill those kind of values in a small micro time to be able to make it worth enough for you to go out at 5 in the morning and do conditioning, to have that extra protein shake, because what you need to do is lean on those values, the things that you find important, starting again with family, being easy and obvious to understand, but now your team or your
Hmm.
tactical unit or your squadron or your position group, at some point in those cascades, you're going to be challenged whether it's worth it enough. And I think that going to the dark side is an easy way because, again, at the end of the day, if you fail in the weight room, nobody dies. Like, you can try again. But when you get into real situations where championships or money is on the line or lives are on the line, not the best plan to make that the first time that you've experienced lack of control. And so I think that that's absolutely at the highest level. That dark side or out of control environment is certainly important. It needs to be, in any plan.
100%. I like to experience that dark side, and I like to talk about it in a way that it's. You also need to think about, okay, so we'll take an American football for an instance. There's 4 quarters. That's 4 quarters. Then you might have overtime,
Mhm.
might, but if you prepare for overtime, regardless if it comes or not, you're able to go the whole distance. And it's a game. I coach a lot of professional boxers, and we do a lot more than 12 rounds. We do a lot more than their sport max. So the more that you can do past your max, the bigger edge you have on that you're a competitor. That's the way I like to look at it as well.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance of you can do more, but then they know that they're doing more, so it doesn't have the same shock. We use a lot of false finishes. Hey, 5 sprints, let's go. All right, they do the five, great job. All right, we're gonna do another one. Well, how many more? There is a natural regulation of
Mhm.
self-preservation that occurs, and so sprinkling in the fifth quarter. I mean, anybody wants, they can look at the 2019 Yale Harvard game. We went in, we were getting absolutely crushed. Go to halftime. We have protests during the middle of halftime. They storm the field. They stop the game for about an hour. But it's the fall in New England, and the Yale Bowl is one of the oldest stadiums in the world. Um, yeah, there's no lights. So now that it's the fall, we don't have light. Light is setting. We do an incredible comeback. And again, if you find it on YouTube, just skip to the fourth quarter where we're down by 3 or 4 touchdowns, come back, tie the game, go into overtime Well, what's better than one overtime? Two overtimes, and it's getting dark to the point where it was on. I don't know if we went a third, but it basically the refs were like, it's getting too dark. This game is going to end in a tie, just like it did back in 19, I think it's 69 or 64, where Harvard Yale tied in that game. But that's what we prepared for. And the coolest thing was is when that game ended, one of the players came up to me and was like, "Oh, that's why you made us do all that stuff in the summer where, we didn't know when it was going to end." And it's just because if you're not present in the moment, giving maximal effort, you're missing an opportunity. And so I like false finishes, and I like things to kind of grade them with their effort and intensity on the set. Cool little rep scheme. Well, because I know we had talked about this on the weight room side. Just take 85% of max, say dumbbell bench, and just tell your athletes you got 15 reps. So if I asked you to do 85 for 15 reps, how would you break it out? Maybe you do 3 sets of 5. Maybe a freshman does,
Mhm.
whatever, how like a couple doubles, some triples, whatever. Just run the INOL on that. Run it back until they go and do it. And the other rule is that, hey, if at any point you do a set where you hit at least 8 reps, you got to go up 5 or 10 pounds. Easy enough. So Jerry Martin was famous for doing that. Be like, yep, here's 400 pounds. Give me 24 reps. However you want to do it. Well, how many should I do? Right there, that's a learning moment. I want you to give maximal effort, but you have to maintain your technique. But what you'll see
Mhm.
is that some of the athletes, they'll get the work done, but they're cognitively going to do it at a much lower intensity, both interset and across the set. And so that was a really great tool for freshmen to say, when do we know that you're ready? That you go and you try to
Mhm.
hit 8, you try to hit 8, you go to hit 8, but you get into like 4 or 5, your technique's trash, you cut it short. Great. Because that's what we're trying to do, because it's a razor's edge. We don't want them just to chase the number and hurt themselves, but there's also a realistic comfort level. And you know what? Some days you have to send it and you just do 7 sets of 2. You're still getting the exposure, but I think that that's a really helpful tool for coaches. Again, when you go to the dark side, it's a slippery slope, where it can get out of control. So anytime, whatever your scheme, whether it's conditioning or strength, my first question is always going to be, well, what are the safety rails? Like, what's the cutoffs? Is it below, like I mentioned before, if you drop outside of 10% of the max of the targeted weight, you're done. Conditioning, if you're below 80% of the threshold, you're done. Whatever it is. And so that's an easy way to make sure that you can train very, very, very hard, but be safe. Because unfortunately, every year, people pass away in the summer because the conditioning was inappropriate to their preparedness.
Mhm.
And that's, again, when you have a 40-man or 100-man roster, not everybody's ready to go that day. You need to know how to flip it, have an alternative that's still going to move them forward, but not put them in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, just to touch back on that rep scheme, if you're giving that athlete sort of 15, 25 reps to go and do it, are you also hoping that that teaches them that self-reliance? Okay, I need to manage this the best way that I can for that specific movement.
I mean, yeah, you're getting deep on it. I just wanted to know, would the kid actually go for 8, and or would they go and try to take the easy route, and not right or wrong, but you can. It's a really interesting thing, because what are most athletes used to? Go do 3 sets of 10, go 3 sets of 8. You got an RIR, RPE, whatever thing is that, again, that drives me crazy. You can't tell me you have a 6 or 7 if you've never been a 10, but just go and do you. Because I'll tell you right now, how many wide receivers did you have that always, gave a 10 effort? And I'm like, well, just for clarity, a 10 is giving birth. 1 is nothing. Like, you are not doing a 10 here in this, minivan clamshell station. So I think that when coaches start relying on any of the auto regulatory things, yeah, it's good for subjective feedback, obviously important. How are you feeling? But then you got to look at the numbers. And also, if you're saying that this set is a 10, but we're doing something with a low, RPE, like that might be a behavioral thing, less a physiological thing. So how to approach it. But no, on those rep schemes, to answer your question, I want to see how they tackle it. Ideally, they go for 8 and then they go for 8 again, but they only get 6. Now we're at 14. Then they hit a single on their third set. Or, they go in and do 5 really good reps for 3 sets. And like, that's all good. But I just try that. Take a group of athletes and just do that. Just pick an exercise, say, get these reps done however you want, and just see what their scheme is. See who's like, yeah, I'm going to go for broke, and others like, what did you do? What did you do? How many
Mm,
should I do? Again, there's hesitation. I just want you to give maximal effort every single set without fear of consequences. That's all I'm shooting for.
yeah. So I was thinking a bit too deep on that.
Man, but that you're going to advance the field. Again, where my brain stops, maybe yours continues. But what I can tell you is it's really powerful, especially when you're,
Mm,
and again, pick something simple. Don't make it, a single leg contralateral, press reverse line, like just push ups. Give me 50
Yeah.
push-ups, give me pull-ups, or give me 25 pull-ups. And then the first thing they're going to say is like, I can't do 25. Well, yes, you can, right? How many times have you told people, give it a shot? So again, that's really more on the psychology portion. And especially early on in development, you have less tools in the toolbox. It's a very straightforward path of, we need to get you stronger. We need to work on these kind of basic things, but throw in a couple of those sets where you let the athlete choose. It goes a long way. And I would tell coaches, spend more time listening to the conversations that come out of that than just the,
Mm.
well, what do you mean? What do you think I should do? Is your athlete looking for gratification? And again, if it's a private sector, his mom, dad, like what's their support structure like? What does this athlete see value in? Are they coming to you? Are they like, nah, this is BS. Like, I don't care. I don't want to do this. Da, da, da. Just tell me what to do. All right. Well, when we're on the pitch and it's, we're getting ready to go into, like, do I have to tell you what to do then? Or do you take the initiative to make the people around you better by leading by example, which is what we're shooting.
Yeah. No, that's a good way of thinking as well. Like I'm thinking about back to when I was making my first programs and my coach was coaching me. And it's that thing where he after my first year was up, he was like, you're in charge of your program now. This is the rep schemes that you should go through. This is the rest time. What do you think you need? Create a program for that. And then you're going to do that program. It was trash. It was a trash program. I had power and I think speed, but there was the exact same program for both.
Yeah.
But like now that I look back at it, I'm like, actually, he was teaching me that self reliance of, okay, you're in charge of your performance too. I'm not going to be out there in the field with you, so you need to do whatever you need to do to win.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's important is that you say it was trash, but I think that might be one of the most important programs because you've obviously written a lot of programs in your career. Why did you pick that one? Because that was a learning lesson. And we always talk about it's growing pains, not growing funds. So when you go in there, why did you pick that? That's an inflection point in the road of your development. I can't tell you the number of coaches that tell me, oh, I write a great program, this and that. Tell me your best. I still think today, approaching almost 20 years of this, I don't think I've written a great program and I've won championships and I've had MVPs. And I think Yale now has 7 kids in the NFL, which has never happened ever, representing clients, in 3 different professional leagues. But I think the minute that you as a coach go, now I got it figured out, you're falling behind because you can
Mm-hmm.
always make it better until you write the perfect plan for the perfect day, the perfect mesocycle. You got to be open. I mean, even some of the stuff we've talked today about adding some cognitive, making sure your physical literacy doesn't fall off, and I would challenge anybody, if you think you've got it, hit me up and I'll just ask you some questions the same way that, even to this day, I will write a plan and Dr. Kramer will sit down and just hit me with an absolute barrage of questions. And you're like, I actually don't know what the neural pathways are of the temporal lobe of the da, 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 da. And it's like, oh, roger that. I need to get back to work. And so, and that's about staying humble and hungry. The best coaches are humble and hungry. A lot of people are hungry. A lot of people on Instagram that haven't trained a lot of people or done much are very hungry. I applaud their entrepreneurial spirit, but they haven't done anything. And then on the humble side, yeah, great, you won these championships, you did that, but what did you do today? What did you do in the last week? And so you have to stay that blend. And I think the minute that you can't do that, um, step out, shift your role. Because again, especially if you're in a director role, well, you're modeling for your staff what's expected. And again, you always have to be a student of the game. There's just so much research going on right now that you
Mm-hmm.
can't keep up, even if it was your full-time gig. And then you're going to go coach a 13-year-old and then flip the script and go work with someone who's trying to get ready for selection. Like, you better stay on point and be humble to do that. And then if someone, you tell me these programs that you're talking about now, I got to go think about it when I get off this call. And what can I do? And just understand every day you're moving your career forward or backwards. You don't typically stay the same.
I recently did a conference. Well, it was a conference in Italy where I was doing programming and periodization. Again, periodization is a big taboo topic. Yes,
Why
they're
is that
great in
taboo? Why is that taboo? Talk to me about that. What you guys got on that side of the pond? Talk to me about that.
So again, I've got American experience, and this is where I got my views from. So periodization, you can there's a lot that can go wrong within a season for it to not work. So periodization is great in theory, but it doesn't always. You can't always have a 3 month block for your preseason that you work through power, strength, hypertrophy, all that stuff. Like athletes might not be able to come in. Again, at the elite level, it's a little bit different, but there's a lot of variables that can happen for it to not go according to your plan.
So you're defining periodization as the blocks.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And again, anybody that wants to argue with us, man, just hey, go to your local hospital and find out what block of medical care they're giving. And the best way to
Mhm,
think about it, and again, whether it's coaches I'm with or whether it's the, you know, young interns, go to a hospital and just see what comes through the door. Because that's the highest level. That's the highest level. Is it? And again, diagnostic tools are my eyes. It's my
mhm,
conversations. Now, I'm lucky. I can throw you on a qualysis. I can throw you on a force plate. I can go talk to a research expert at Harvard. I can do a lot, and that's why it's the research center. On the private side, I can make a phone call, find a doctor here, there, right? But it's still the whole thing is all you know is what's in your toolbox as a practitioner. Someone's in front of you. They need to train today. Can you pick the most appropriate? And that's where flexible nonlinear, and I think
mhm,
we've talked about this, that is there's a reason why it's 20 to 30% increases in performance compared to traditional blocks, is because it takes into account, yes, on this mesocycle we need power, yes, in this mesocycle we have these three things. So I'm going to ask, what's my structural thing, what's my electrical thing, what's my biochemical thing? Three things, and we can't be perfect at everything. These are the three areas in the composite that we need to develop. Okay, you came in Monday, you were hungover, can't do my strength day, roger that. Coming in Tuesday, okay, what do I got now? Collectively, what does that week look like? What did I do that week towards those three goals? And, not uncommon at Yale, we'd walk up to our iPads, team builders loaded. We would have 27, 26 workouts in the toolbox ready to go. You are a defensive lineman. You just got called up. Normally Thursday's your power day, but now you're playing on Saturday. We have to pivot and move. What do we do? And then we would, at the end of the season, make a pie chart, and you would see across 120 guys, same football team, same season, not a single one of the pie charts look the same. And that's kind of when we talk about the individualization and periodization, can be in the form of a block. But when I talk with students, it's the what is the diagnostic tool you're using that day in the programs you have right now to make the best training plan for the individual in front of you. And understanding that, again, three people come in, three different plans, three different approaches,
mhm,
but the periodization, it's a coordinated effort because it also can't be random, because
mhm.
the novice athlete,
Uh,
yeah, the novice athlete can recover within 24 hours. So can a novice athlete squat? So you have 14, 50-year-old, can they squat? Yeah, they squat every day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because they're doing the bar, 20 kilos, 23 kilos, 26, whatever. They start building it up. Now, at an intermediate level, it's what was the load on the week. So now, can you squat every day? Probably not, right? Maybe you change up the angle, front squat, back squat, transformer, kabuki, flywheel, whatever, figure it out. And then we look at that week. And then the advanced athlete is, what did we do in the month? And there's a book that Greg Half just put out that's incredible, talking about periodization, where we all know that the Cellier principle, right? The gas principle, we apply a stimulus, it goes down, come up. Well, I love the visual that he has in his model where it's not one line, it's like 4 or 5 lines. And I would argue that there's probably even more. So what's the psychological line? What's the biochemical line? What's the strength line? What's the mobility line? What's the nutrition? How deep do you want to go? And then, as we are here today, what is the thing that we can make the biggest change on? And that's the way I try to coach coaches on, to realize that there's so many levels to the game that, again, just being complacent with, yeah, a 3-week block. Well, in 4 weeks, I'm going to add volume. Okay. What's their nutrition like? Well, that's not my department. Well, do you have a DEXA plan scanned? No. Well, we don't have, that's not okay. So how are you know? So volume is not a training outcome, in the sense that that's what you're, if I get to blank volume, I know my sport. We use volume as a proxy for either work capacity, training density, or metabolic, conditioning. But in all phases, you can measure that. So if you don't have a tool in place and you're just saying volume for volume, you get a lot of trash reps. You're kind of in the
mhm.
dead zone. So that's where, again, you're going to write bad plans. Boyd used to say this all the time. Just write them once, please. Just write them once. Don't just keep rehashing the wheel, that you're programmed with a capital P. If they had been more committed, if they had nutrition, no, that's on you. Sometimes you get an athlete where they can only do 3x5 hugs because psychologically they're not committed to the process. But you just saying, yep, we're going to throw in a giant metabolic complex. We're going to get them mentally right. No, you're not. You're going to break down and have more issues. So again, being open to that, and asking from the team, what do they see from their perspective, is super important.
What was that book called? I think.
So I believe it's Advanced Periodization, coming out from Human Kinetics, the blue front. It's got some blocks on it, but he talks about it. But I love that visual, because that really clicked for me, because we always think about, okay, stimulus, and then response, and it should look like a staircase going up. But yeah, once you see that, you have multiple lines, now you have to represent and account for them. It becomes a little more complicated. How many times have you seen athletes get really, really strong in the weight room, but their life is falling apart on the outside?
Mhm.
Tell me that's not part of performance.
And again, more so for student athletes where they're also going through stress academically. And then how can we manage both as coaches as well? Stress meets stress. That's a recipe for disaster. So how can we again taper off a little bit so that they can go through their exam season, go through their hand-ins and all that stuff? It's very complex in the way that we have to think about not just what we do, but what they do over a day, week, month, year.
Yeah. Dave Granito, work with him at the center, and he talks about, performance is two parts. It's training and recovery. So if I ask
Hmm.
you right now, can you explain to me your training plan? So you're going to talk to me about whatever. Now I say, can you explain to me the recovery plan? Do you have a recovery workout? Do you know when he's floating? Do you know when she's doing her near infrared bed? Do you know when she's doing any of kind of the acoustic training? Do you know what her latency is to go to bed? Are you measuring his HRV? Are you using Endel soundscapes where it's AI using your heart rate to actually use acoustic
Hmm.
waves to put you into deep sleep? I mean, how deep do you want to go in performance? And again, to me, I just every day I'm like, man, I got to do better. I got to do better because now suddenly the expectation is, yes, I want to see your 4-day training block this week with multiple levels of flexible nonlinear tools in the toolbox. But then on the flip side, I want you to be able to explain to me their nutrition. I want you to explain to me their recovery. Because to your point, there's no such thing as overtraining. There's under recovering. That's
Hmm.
again, that's where they will go. And again, the balance is a lot of the finals or championships happen in really inconvenient times. Number of times
100%.
kids would come in with 2.5 hours of sleep, and like, we got to go. Like, the tournament's here this weekend. It doesn't matter whether you're feeling crappy, but that I like thinking back to what you said about the dark side. You're not in control. If you need to have a perfect HRV, a perfect sleep score, a perfect lift, perfect nutrition to have perfect performance, you're not an athlete. That's just not the way it goes. We are constantly getting hit from every angle of disruptors to be able to say, oh, it's got to be, in a theoretical vacuum. And that's what the researchers
100%.
don't understand too. They'll tell us things and you and I'll be like, yeah, that's no, no, it's Matt drill season. That's not how that's gonna work. That's no.
100%. There's also a theory that I've coming up with. It's sometimes your best workouts or your best performance is when you're fucking tired.
Mhm.
Is when you've just got nothing else to give, but you give it that all for that session, and you hit PR, and you do something that you've not been able to do before.
Yeah, I mean, the Russians used to literally keep their weightlifters up the night before and not let them sleep. Now, I'll tell you, at Yale, it was funny. We'd measure vertical jump every lift, and we would have some of our best PRs during exam season. So they would jump, and again, they're
Mm.
they're running on the fight or flight response. They're going. But what I would say is that everything has a cost. So if
Mhm.
you have today, you need to perform right now. We can do whatever we got to do to get that performance. But then secondarily, as a coach and a practitioner, we know that now we had these great results. We on the backside need to do extra recovery. So maybe it's a Friday game, but then Saturday, Sunday we have off, or we double down. Hey, you got to float. So every time you set a PR, you got to float. And we had 2 float tanks in New Haven. We could send guys to be able to do that. And I think it's just important that as you're pushing the envelope, it's a super razor's edge of overtraining. And if I gave you wrist straps, you can lift more.
Mhm.
But now I need to make sure that your technique is extra good, that you don't roll your back out, because where your grip on a double overhand RDL, deadlift, row would give out first, we have now strapped you into the device. So as a coach, I would say, hey, you can't wear wrist straps until you can pull 500 pounds. At 500 pounds, you have enough technique, but then it's going to be, I'm watching you like a hawk. And then we need to have an understanding. If I yell, drop it, I don't want you to push to get one more rep. Roger that. Okay, great. And now let's go. And then we had guys pulling the house. So again, you just got to make sure that you have, every time you're pushing the envelope forward, you have the safety mechanisms in place that you or your staff can put in place to make sure that people don't get hurt.
I'm a very strong believer of only giving these aids when they're getting to a max where they physically can't hold it anymore. Belts, straps. Like I'm a big believer in if I'm not over 100 kilograms, I do apologize. European
I get it.
kilograms.
I get it. I get it.
If I'm not over 100, 120 kilograms, I do not strap myself into that bar. Only after that I strap in, because that's when I'm starting to to get that peak weight for me. Same with the squat belt. I will only strap into a squat belt once I'm 130, 140. Other than that, I do not peak, because I want to rely on my own body to control and lift that weight by itself.
Yeah, and they people go back and forth. My whole thing is that again, within the domains of football, of rugby, a lot of those loads aren't at powerlifting levels. So if you weigh 200 pounds, or let's see, I'll try it for you guys, like the 100 kilos or 200 kilos, and you're a 100 kilo guy, you should be able to do double your body weight. Now,
Hmm.
if you can't, injury, pass, whatever, those are one off. But as a general rule, I mean, Mother Nature's pretty smart. Like if your hands can't pick it up, you shouldn't lift it, because you think about muscles, nervous system, like I touch the fire, it's hot, I take my hand out, that's quick reacting. Muscles, oh, we keep lifting this thing, let's get bigger in cross-sectional area. Tendons, ligaments, and bones, they're like the grumpy uncles that like want to take a while, they're like questioning whether you should do this. Those things take a while. So if you get into a situation where some of the subsystems aren't ready, yeah, fine, but you then need to watch them like a hawk, because
Mm,
again, we're reaching now levels that otherwise your system wouldn't be able to lift. You just have to do it with care.
agree, agree. Going back to the cognitive training, and this is something that I'm finding really fascinating right now. What is your take on cognitive training, and how should it be applied throughout, again, preseason, in season, and then postseason?
Yeah, you can quote me on it. Cognitive training will be the future. And um cognitive training isn't doing a bunch of silly games. It's understanding the different levels and processes of both how you receive information. So I see it, I hear it. I'm speaking in English. If you started speaking to me in Portuguese right now, I hear you, but I don't know what actions need to be done. Then we go
Mhm,
into a decision tree of, oh, is it this play or that? So how many times have you coached someone and what were you thinking? They didn't. They froze up. They locked up. So that pathway can be trained. Multi-object tracking can be trained. Reading. Think about if you read faster. Well, that's the same thing with extraction of information. Where we're at right now, how you take in information. So what's that speed is one thing. But then also, I mean, why are seniors better than and juniors better? Because they have more reps. They've gone through the Bayesian logic tree more frequently. And you know who the best are? The coaches, because they've got tons
mhm,
of experience. But what do they lack? They lack the physical capacity to make the cut. So you really kind of have these three domains of taking information in, like, do you need glasses? Secondarily, are you listening? Are you focusing? And then in that middle group of, okay, when this happens, this is what I do. Now, if I'm looking at a hole or I'm at the scrum, there's visual information there. But what happens before the match? The coach talks to you what the plan is, the strategy. So like right now, if I asked you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? Could you tell me? Probably.
smoothie.
Yeah. If I asked you, what did you have 3 weeks ago for lunch? Can you tell me? And you that you did it, it's not important. And so not important memories, especially for learning, teaching, and knowledge transfer, that's where I think the hang up is. And especially the way that sports are, this new offense, this new scheme, this new skill. Well, you have to do the skill, and maybe you're not strong enough yet. So now you go to the weight room. But then there's going to be an intersection where you need to do it if this situation happens, and that can also be measured. And so right now, we don't think anything about having a protein shake after a workout, right? Like that's you can work out and take one or not. It's not the end of the world, but certainly same training plan, same individual, same everything, but you give nutrition post workout, there's a different adaptation.
Mhm,
Cognitive the same way. And I think it's just really incredible, especially memory. When you mess up in a game, is it because you failed, because you didn't do right? Are you ruminating? Are you keep thinking about it? Or can you move on? There's a lot of research. So, specifically out of New Haven, where they looked at basically the neurotransmitter cells, neuropeptide Y. Tinda Civic did some research, her PhD was in that. So, in SEER school, how do you handle stress and trauma? Well, we know that people have this neuropeptide. They're elite performers. They're more resilient. I don't know. If I fail a bench press, I don't think it's the end of the world. If I go and have a big event, I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about this one individual that I need to take care of. At my position group. How your mindset is a combination of the psychology, but then also the neurobiology. And what we
mhm.
don't know is it's selected. Is it because of trauma when they were younger? We don't know, but it's really interesting. So when I see coaches coaching, I'm not watching what they're saying. I'm seeing how the kid responds. And just cognitive, like cognitive behavioral therapy is a real thing. How you frame it. Did you fail or did you learn? Because I'll tell any pro athlete, the only options we have every day is to win or learn.
Mhm.
Don't give me any of the poor me stuff. Don't give me any of the sad stuff. Oh, especially baseball, you can fail 60% of the time and you go to the Hall of Fame. In some occupations, if you fail once, people die. So, again, what is your reference frame? And I would encourage coaches to try to build that athlete mindset of win or learn, win or learn. Did you fail on that back squat or did you give a maximal effort and appropriately bail out of the set? Did you win or learn when it came to your nutrition because you had a muffin and pizza for breakfast and then you didn't perform in your lift? It wasn't the rep scheme, it was that you didn't prepare for it. And I think that's again where the cognitive side, it kind of blends, but for sure, processing speed. So PVT tests, you can buy apps. What is your reaction time? See the dot, tap the dot, see the dot, tap the dot. Auditorily, hey, I want you to click the button every time you hear a vowel. So
Mm.
it's like B, C, A, 4, E, T, and see how many of those you miss. Because again, we're just signal processing machines. And when we have to recall things in high stress, that's where I've really seen separating the pros. That deck of cards, I told you that's a really easy one to implement and see that people fall apart.
I've been speaking to the CEO of Technology, and it's this app that you can get on your phone. And he works a lot with a guy who's been on the podcast, Peter, and he's more into motorsports. And the way he uses it, it's like he does conditioning sessions, but then he has someone tap along on a device during the break, and then they go again. Then they perform those tasks again. What is your take on the technology that's out there, and how is it applicable to real life situations?
Yeah, well, first off, one, familiar with Soma, that's a great example of using technology, but not every coach has access to it. Every coach has a whiteboard, every coach has a deck of cards. But what they're talking about in their platform, and if anyone's not familiar, you'd have an app and you can assign program, just like we assign a workout, you can assign a cognitive workout. So that's cool, like if you can do it. And I think there's definitely merit. But what we need to understand is if I gave you an athlete and I said, can you make them stronger? Is that a true statement or is that just like a feeling and a belief?
Mm,
Say like you would with high confidence, if I give you a high school athlete and say, hey Manny, make them stronger, you would be like, yeah, I can do that. It's not a feeling. You can actually
100%.
put weight on
Yeah.
the bar, you can measure force. But now cognitively, the speed and decision making, if I asked you, I want you to speed up their cognitive processing, right now the field isn't very sure whether it's like hokey or if it to me the PVT is an example that the psychomotor vigilance test is no different than a 1 RM back squat. If you're above 300 milliseconds, you are slow. I think legally drunk reaction time is like 420 milliseconds. So if I do a 10-minute test and I have an athlete that's for all intents and purposes healthy and they're pulling an average of 370, but they have spikes of 260, so their mind's kind of wandering, they're thinking about different things, the play's over. So you're not
Mhm.
even paying attention. So now I got to get you to pay attention. Then you got to see the signals. Then you got to make the right decision in the decision tree. You got to recall what coach just told us Monday morning in our thing. And then you physically got to be prepared to execute it and then recover from it. So there's like 7 steps right there. And you got to make sure that like you do them all, but they can't even focus. So to me, I would say, yeah, I can make them stronger and let's get their PVT below 300. So that's where cognitive is and where it's going is that you'll have it integrated. So you get strong, then you do a meter per second, then you do a meter per second with a little bit of the dark side. The dark side
Mm,
includes the following cognitive tasks and decision making, and you have to do it with high acidity or you have to do it with high stress, lack of sleep, or lack of whatever. If you're at elevation, lack of air, all of these things go into okay, now make that call, take that shot, take that, make that pass, whatever it is. That's where training is going, where it'll blend, where you won't think of it no differently than like VBT isn't its own thing. It's part of training. Well, that's where cognitive said.
mhm. So you think of it as a process to get, again, it's raising that bar from, okay, we've won a seat at this championship, but let's do it again because everyone's caught up, so we need to do even better. Is that a fair way to interpret what you said?
Yeah. I mean, again, go back to lacrosse. We were small males that didn't lift. Well, I don't know if it's going to make them better, but it's certainly not going to hurt. So that every collision from an injury standpoint, we're the bigger object. Let's get to 195 to 205. I'd even let some of
Mhm.
the, defensive players could get to 210, 215, but let's be sub, 15% body fat. Well, but now the entire sport has elevated. Everybody's bigger. All right. Well, and football had the same thing. Don't forget with Husker Power in Nebraska, nobody was lifting in the 70s and 80s, but by the 90s and 2000s, it's pretty standard. But I think cognitive is weird. It's okay. You didn't make your set. What was your response? Are you ready to come back and fight for more? You just got blown up in the B gap. Are you coming to the
Mhm.
sideline with your head down, or are you just out of your mind, ready to go back and attack? That that isn't a given. So you have to train that. But then on the actual like nuts and bolts side, I just want to know the speed of your focus and vigilance. I want to know your color and depth perception. I want to know your near far shift. And Soma is a great example. Synaptics a great example. There's a whole bunch of different tools and technologies, but at the root, it comes back to those steps we talked about, which is you need to make a decision, and you can make the right decision, just be late, right? Like that's nothing wrong with
Mhm.
that. But like there's an external time constraint in every cognitive decision making, especially in sports, that you either have or you don't.
I agree. And the thing is, I always go to is we can only, and I'm kind of speaking from a point of where I've obviously not got that many years behind me in this industry, but with the ones I do, I'm very much, I reach out to any coach that I can and speak about just sort of like what we're doing, go back and forth. But there has been coaches that have said, I'm good, maybe next month, maybe, and then they just keep pushing it along the lines, or they refer back to their book, whatever, but don't actually give me the time to be like, okay, this is what I do, this is what I figured out. But then there's those coaches who coach coaches, and I love that saying because like what you've done today with us is, yes, you've gone through these experiences, you've probably encountered a lot of failures, a lot of things that you would have done differently, but you're open and honest to talk about them as well. And I think there's real value in us communicating with each other, because that's the only way that, okay, let's all compete at the same level so we can really see who's the fucking good coach.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, if you ask the Ivy League coaches when I was there, I wasn't telling them anything. Hey, let's just be honest. If I win, we get donor money, we get a new building, we get a new field, and so. But I do think that I wouldn't be where I'm at without the help of Dr. Kramer and Boyd and Mark and kind of all the other coaches that they don't have time to mention. So you do have to pay it forward. But at the same time, as a young coach, I can't tell you the number of times where the coaches will say, "Hey, I want to do the latest and greatest thing." I'll be like, show me you can set up the weight room in 15 minutes. Show me how you can audit this plan. Show me that the turf, we used to joke it. Yeah, we had a blue turf. I want to see it blue, blue. Well, what does blue, blue means? It means you get on your hands and knees at the end of the night and there's not a string in there. And not that you couldn't use a vacuum, but out of principle, show me that you're willing to put everything in to go do this. And not that I want you to, prove it to me as a person, but to the field, that you have the attention to detail required for when we get to the highest level. Because when I ask you to work with a tactical operator or a professional athlete, and I need you to auto regulate their max, and I need to know what their percentage bands are, and I need it in 30 seconds. If you're not squared away and it's on a level that's way more than what most people are used to, you're not ready. So go back,
Mhm.
read the books, do the basics so well that you can't get them wrong. Then we can talk about the new high speed stuff. And you have to check yourself as a coach too. I mean, I still try to strip a rack, put it back up, and get it under 3 minutes. 3:05. Like, is that good enough? Start having your standards and making sure that is your staff. Like, is everybody lockstep? Because you go into any department, I do it this way, I do it that way. Mm-mm. Imagine if you went to Starbucks and you're like, "I'd like a coffee," and they're like, "Cool, here's a Big Mac." No, no, no. There's standardization and processes that you need to have in place. And yeah, you want a little oat milk, or you want a latte, or you want this. Yeah, we can add a little bit of spice here and there, but I can't tell you the number of coaches who walked in and they're like, "Yeah, I'm working with these like high school kids. We're gonna do a hypertrophy plan." Really? Like in a 15-year-old? Like, really? Have they even started puberty? How are you gonna handle
Mhm.
that? What's their nutrition like? How are you monitoring it? And then it's like, "Oh, well, don't question me." Okay, well, I won't, like, I'm not gonna question you, but I just, again, you have to be open and honest. And then if you write a plan, like I told you about my strength plan, when Bill Kramer says, like, "That's cute," like, how does that make you feel? Like, we're just Ivy champs, we're going to national championships, like whatever, and like our training plans are cute. Why don't you try this? And you're like, "Oh wow, it's a fluke. Oh, we're on person number 15, and he just went up 120 pounds, what, 60 kilos, something like that for European
Mhm.
in a month." And then do it again and do it again. So when you start seeing these kind of insane numbers, I think if I had not been open to a senior coach like him, then does that make me better? So that's where it's finding that balance. But do the work and get the basics done
Mhm.
really, really well. And then just
The fundamentals are the fundamentals.
Yeah.
You like if you've got those nailed, like there's not a program that could be wrong. Like it can be wrong, but like going back to the conference in Italy, the the people there were scared to pick my program apart, and I was like, "Don't be fucking scared! Like I've picked it apart." And then I started going through my role, like my faults with that program. And they're like, "You do that?" I was like, "Yeah, like I can only be as best as my last program, and if that was shit, what can I do better this time?"
And I think, like, you bring up the point of right and wrong. So that's pretty binary of it's good or it's bad. What I would say, just like medicine, there's degrees of optimal.
Mm,
Was that the optimal program? And you can get a young coach and they'll be like, yeah, I did this rep scheme. Like, yeah, sure, your workout is optimal. What was their recovery like? Oh, that's not my department. What was their nutrition like? Oh, that's not my. I thought you were the performance coach. So you're just like the weight coach. You just write the weights and
mm,
the running. So okay, now let's unpack that and start to go. And that's where really you should be striving every time. There's going to be some good in some program, and there's going to be some less good, or there's going to be things that needed to be marinated a little bit longer before you installed it. So what did you learn? But that's to me, still to this day, as Kobe Bryant talked about, like in his career, he loved the sound of the swish. I love the sound when the 45 clicks on and the collars go on and it's on. And then we have an hour. And then at the end, this is what we thought we were going to do. This is what we actually did. What was the change? They're coming in the next day. All right, did we win the day or not? Versus just,
mm.
yeah, I know I ran my block. I'm doing a GPP block. You know how many people are stuck in GPP land forever? Like, well, at some point we got to play the season. At some point we got to get underway. And so if you don't know where you're going, how do you measure it? How do you know when to change? And so again, I've been spoiled kind of in my approach towards it. But I would just say is that everybody's different. But I still go back to I teach the low bar back squat the same way I did 20 years ago because that's exactly how I've done it, and everybody gets the same results. Then we teach them the high bar, then we teach them the front squat, maybe show them a safety bar. Now we're going to talk about Olympic lifting. We're going to talk about landing. So it's okay to have your kind of go-to staples and then be open to kind of tweaking the, stuff at the end.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I've never heard a coach talk about low bar squat before high bar squat. Is there a reason for that?
It works. Like you take any athlete and you put them in there and you change the angle of the moment arm. And I would say that, I remember in college picking up starting strength and practical programming and reading it. And it was weird, right? And you go to do it. And I did it myself. You mentioned yourself, you went and tried the low bar and look at power lifters. They're in suit and kitted up. Well, it's an easy way to develop bilateral strength. They go down, they go up. Okay, great. Well, have you ever tried to jump in a low bar? It doesn't really work so well. So you're going to have to change it. And so then we're also then going to do a front squat. But all of this, all of those are variants of what position can you put the bar on your back to move the most amount of weight, just force. And it's funny, was it 2 years ago? I went to I went to the starting strength beginner coach seminar, and I went in, and there was some young coach, and she was so excited to coach me up and show me all the things I was doing wrong. I went with it; it was fine. But even still, when Rip came over, Mark Ripto came over, and he's like, "Try this." And I still remember the coaching cue. He just put his foot down and act as a block. So that was kinesthetic feedback. He's like, "Make your foot touch my foot." Bang. Oh, instead of turn your toes out, he's like, "Touch here." Great. Boom. Go in. And so we go to do that. And so even now, there's ways I can teach it better. But you go walk into any weight room I'm in, and I think right now I have 3 15-year-old kids that all squat body weight. They've been training with us for less than 4 months. Again,
Nice.
14, 15 years old. Now, will we continue that forever? No, now we need to shift into the Olympic lifting, but we've been doing drop catches. We've been doing medicine ball stuff. But think about what my kids look like when they walk on the field and they can do 10 pull-ups, they can squat their body weight, and they're playing against other 15-year-olds that can't tie their shoe. They don't have the motor coordination, but they also haven't been training 4 days a week locked in. I mean, just being an organized 14-year-old makes you stronger. Being an organized
Hmm.
10-year-old makes you stronger. So that's why, again, the low bar, the overhead press, the RDL, those kind of basic concepts, I keep it super simple. But knowing that we're going to open those gateways as we get stronger because everything you do is a percent of your maximum. And just knowing when to flip those switches is what's important.
I agree. There's a speaking of an organization. There's an athlete. He's a field hockey athlete, and he has like his schedule is like I looked at his schedule, and it's like from this time to this time school, from this time to this time training. Like he's got everything on his phone diary, and I was like, that is organized. And he was like, yeah, like I think with everything that I've got going on, I need this. And I was like, okay. But then when we get to his lifting, he's strong as hell. We've actually got a joke. So he is strong as hell, and he is a very good lifter, but he thinks too much. Like he's just constantly in his head. And we've gone to the point where now we're making jokes that he can only lift if I'm there because I make him not think.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of like he's just so much on like I need this breath, and then goes. But then he'll overthink and he'll miss a step. So I'm just like cue. So
Yeah,
explode.
get him in the cognitive
Power.
zone, give him randomized stuff. And I think that's a great example of where no doubt person's probably stronger than most in the age bracket. Um,
Yeah,
that is not
he's
going to be a limit.
16.
16, perfect. Okay, great. So here you go. Your heart rate one that you talked about before. Hey, you're going to go when this heart rate tells you not you're not in control. And why that's important is that that's a psychology thing because he
Hmm.
finds comfort in routine and structure. But what happens when you go and it's raining and I wasn't prepared for that, or the excuses will start to be, but I didn't get my warm up in, I didn't do my clamshells and my squat mini bands monster walks, I didn't. No, just go. And again, your results on the field is going to be a combination of the last 6 months of what you've done. The hay's in the barn, go execute. And so that would be a good case study where I would say, let's start experimenting with something out of control. Hey, you're going
Hmm.
to do this. If you remember the cards, you're going to do 5 reps. If you don't remember the cards, you're going to do 6. And by the way, we're going to do this in real time off your heart rate, and let's go. So he doesn't know how long the rest is going to be, and he doesn't know what the card breakdown is going to be, and then you just track that until they reach the point where they're just like, I'm just going to go. Coach Manny, what do I need to do? Let's just roll. And that's what you're hoping for. And take that time. Think about stairs. You've gotten him very strong, so the stair has gone up. But now, as we're kind of on the rise and the run, what do we need to do here? While we're on the run here, let's get some of this cognitive stuff cleaned up. Let's start hitting multiple angles. Start giving him new kind of stimulus. You can do that and park him there for 4 to 6 weeks, and then
100%.
start to bring them up.
Agree. Agree. And it's that constant feedback loop where, okay, he's progressing. Cool. Let's think about the next steps. And I think again, going back to periodization, it's good in theory, but you also need to be reactive to what is actually happening in his life as well.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm with you. If you still train in blocks, then you're missing the boat. But I think that the periodization, in the sense of whether you call it module, flexible, nonlinear, it's reactive, and or maybe not reactive, it's adaptive. So you have a plan in place. If my force plate numbers are here, if my HRV is there, if my subjective score is here, if my acute workload, whatever the things you're using, your KPIs, but what's the best workout for the athlete in front of you? That's the way it's going. And it's fine. But I also get to, right? There's nothing wrong if you are so deconditioned, and which really isn't performance. Hey, show up 4 days a week. We're going to do calisthenics. It's been working for the military for years. Push up, sit up, do your run, do some sprints, change direction. If you do that, you're more than most of the average people. So you can get above a normal baseline. But yeah, certainly in performance, you got to dial it in and know what lever is being pulled to kind of help improve the likelihood that their task is going to be better than if they were not to have you.
I think as strength coaches, we miss a lot on calisthenics as well. I think being able to push, pull, move, sprint, walk, run your body weight is so important for not just athletic development, but longevity as well.
Yeah, and
Like,
I mean, but think about how many coaches train the way they train. I mean, let's be honest. Our field is a bunch of former athletes that like the weight room, just like the story that I told. And then they're like, "Well, I like training like West Side. I like doing triphasic. I like this." You're not being a critical thinker, because
mhm,
you know what? The 17-year-old golfer in front of you probably doesn't need to do a banded, power clean like the way that Louis did back in the day. There's probably another way. And not that you couldn't do it. I mean, you certainly could, but explain to me within the athlete composite. So, thinking of the domain of the hardware, software, cognitive, was that really the number one thing that needs to be improved? Or are you doing
mhm.
logistically comfortable, which is unfortunately, and that's why I think with our field, that's why we don't get paid a lot. It's one of the many reasons why. Because again, I would have a hard time right now saying, let me put together an all star staff at the college level in the United States, given the current economic market with how much you have to pay them. I would have a very hard time. But if you look at banking or you look at accounting, even sport coaches ultimately have to answer to the win-loss column. Strength
Mhm.
coaches strength coaches can easily live in the gray. And as much as the sport coaches can be, not great, I've also had conversations with some strength coaches where I'm like, well, you're showing up 15 minutes before your lift with flip-flops and eating rice out of a bucket. Like, what kind of image does that send? But you want to get paid more. The coach is going to get fired if he doesn't win. You don't,
Mhm.
but yet you want to get paid like that. And that's why anybody that likes to poo poo on the football coaches, if you've never coached American football, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And they change out strength staff and support staff like handbags. So if you get in there and it's like you're making 250, chances are you're not making that kind of money for more than 3 or 4 years. Because if you win, the coach moves on. Maybe he brings them with you, or if you fail, you're the first person out the door. And so I think as a field, it'll be interesting to see when we have more technology integrated, because I do feel like right now in the history and going, and I say that kind of going from Spartans on forward, there's never been as much accountability because we can
Mm.
measure things in the weight room. But also there's a disconnect of context. So depending on how, if the accountability can be leveraged to show worth and value, just like an offensive coordinator, or hey, when you hire Manny, in general, this is what the injuries are, this is what the strengths are. I mean, I had injury rates that were up, but I also won more games. So yeah, so that's my profile. When we went and started working with professional athletes, well, now you're a lot less trying to make them jump higher, run faster. It's mitigating the breakdown that occurs at 28, 29, 32, 35, 37. It's a different game. And so, and knowing that, but we're going to use technology one way or another. I hope the industry as a whole can figure out how to use it in a positive way to confirm the
Mhm.
biases that we have, prove the things that work, but then also really, finally bridge that gap between the science and practice. Because like right now, like I laughed when you said that when we started. How many times people say things and you're just like, that's not going to work. That just,
Mhm.
or I don't care what the research says. This is what my guy likes. This is what I'm going to do, or this is what my lady likes. Like, we're going to roll with it because we got to win games. And so I think that that'll be nice to see that bridge kind of happen.
100%. And I think it's well, it's like your role is dependent on someone performing. So you can do the best job that you can theoretically, but practically that guy can hate you. And
But
it goes back to that thing where you can write the best program in the world, but if the person that you're wanting to run that program with doesn't like the program or you, they're not fucking doing it. It doesn't matter. That program is shit.
yeah, I always loved asking athletes, who'd you like working with? Whatever the answer was. And it wasn't always the best programmers. They just like them as people. They just,
Mhm,
I love waking up at 7 in the morning and seeing coach whoever. I loved working that. And now again, there were some where they liked them and the program worked, but it was a big lesson. And I think that, I would always encourage, especially people that come the traditional exercise science, strength and conditioning. I want to go in, they look the part, they're squared away, the little soldiers in the weight room. Go do personal training and show me that people want to pay you for your knowledge. Well, I'm not a salesperson. Oh, okay, got it. So you just want, if people come to you, you'll train them. And in a college setting or an academy setting, they have no other choice. Like,
mhm.
so again, now you're basically just a glorified parent. You're going to tell them what to do. And again, depending on their level of enthusiasm, they'll give an effort. But I want to see that people will pay you for your knowledge, right? Makes sense. Can you imagine a plumber who's like, I only change the toilets that I want? Like, no, like it's a job. A banker needs to show returns. And, we do have enough data now. Yeah, if you work with me within 6 months, you're going to squat, 1.5, 1 times your body weight. We know that your conditioning is going to be here. This is the program, and this is why you pay me, whatever the rate is. I think, you have to do that. But it's humbling. It's humbling because
Very.
what you said, I mean, there's plenty of terrible personal trainers that are just really good at selling the show. And for that 1 hour that they're on,
Really can.
oh yeah, absolutely.
So I again much more like my coach, and I prefer practical experience than a piece of paper. So when I was going through my education, I did uh, a year of college on my gym qualifications. I then worked in the industry, which was a public gym. Anyone comes in, anyone pays you. Like, you have to be self sufficient in selling yourself and selling your program. And I did that for 2 years. And then I went back to my education, and that's when I started. And I went to America, coached multiple teams. But those 2 years, has taught me more than perhaps my whole university degree did, because I was interacting with real people. Okay, she doesn't care for squatting. Like, she's paying me. If I push squatting in, she doesn't want to pay me.
Right.
So I'm not going to push squatting, and that doesn't work for her. And it's that thing where you're dealing with real people is the best way to progress as a coach. And there's no one that can change my mind on that. That is a hill I will die on.
Yeah.
If the person doesn't like your program, that's it.
Well, let me try this though. Think about the state that you went into that. You had some understanding going into it. I think you were more receptive to the lessons learned because you went in with the mindset. Because I can also tell you that people that have tons and tons of experience, they can operate at a certain level, but there is need for education. But just as, I teach you to squat, I teach you to front squat before I teach you to hang clean. Developmentally, when we tried to break it down, the three things that, we kind of feel like are super important is you got to have the three C's. The first
Mhm,
one is you have to have the credentials. So you need to know that this isn't the hamstring. You need to know that, like, push pull ratio. There's some fundamental, and that doesn't mean you're good. You go get your CSCS or you go get your accreditation. What that means is you've shown me that you're committed to trying to be a professional. Next level, competence. And I think this is what you're alluding to, is that there's a lot of people with credentials that aren't very
mhm,
competent. So they become teachers. And so they, become analysts. They remove themselves from interacting with the athlete, client, patient, whatever it is. And then you have this other track of practitioners where you got to go. Like, you have to do it. But if you go in there and you're learning on the fly and you don't have that understanding prerequisite, those hours logged on the floor at Yale, we knew that it took about 800 hours of floor time at the college level to make someone competent to the point of where you would be hired.
mhm,
Doesn't mean you're going to be great, but it was about 800 hours of setup, breakdown, interacting with programs. So you have this kind of competency line that, you either can do the job or not. And I think that's where right now we're splintering. I'm going to be a data analyst. I'm a sports scientist. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a teacher of physical therapy, but I'm not in a clinic. I'm a strength coach, but only in this one setting. So everybody kind of breaks out. And then the last part is the commitment. So how many times have you seen someone with all the credentials, they got the history, they're super, super competent, but, again, take someone like me, at my age right now is a lot different than being 25. So are you committed to waking up to this team, to this football program? And so you'll have some people that have the most competence, the most credentials, they're
mhm,
just not really committed, or they're doing something else. And again, every endeavor, whether it's a job, whether it's a team, there's a certain level of commitment and standard that you need to hold. And you got to have all three. And you can have people that are
100%.
super committed and they try hard and they've done lots and lots of things. They're just not very competent. Like, they're just not good at their job, or they don't have the knowledge. They don't understand. They haven't learned the soft skills as much as the hard skills because they didn't get formal education in team dynamics. So they fall short. And if you have the three, you put 5, 6 people, you can have magical things happen. If in that environment that you see there's an opportunity and it's been pointed out to you by leadership, you need to work on your plyometrics or your agility. Do you take that and say, Roger that, and go try to be the best you can be? Or do you kind of thumb your nose at it? And that's really where I do think your point of competency requires hands on. But I've also seen
Mhm,
people that go, I don't need a degree. Papers are no, like, endocrinology is real. You can't take an overnight course, and tell me that you're a master coach and that your 500 hours of floor time trumps someone with an exercise science degree, that they know the history, like, how the body
mhm.
works. We deal a lot with that with hormones. Anytime I hear someone is a hormone expert, I'm like, oh, you went to an overnight course. Like, you have no clue how endocrinology works and biophysiology. Like, you have no clue. But the danger is that when you're out in the field and you're taking that client's money, they're expecting you to have knowledge. And when it's wrong, or you're trying to monetize it because you went to your weekend seminar and now you're a guru of hormones, you know, people can get really hurt. You can end a
Yep,
career in one rep, and you
100%.
can always look more tomorrow. So that's where, to me, I'm always cautious, and I'm probably harder at this point on coaches than I am on athletes. In general, athletes come in the gym, they want to get better. Private
Yep.
training, they want to pay somebody. It may or may not be you. But to the practitioners out there, if you're not constantly working on your craft and trying to make yourself better, you are falling behind. And there's a finite amount of jobs, there's a finite amount of people that want to pay for services. How do you make yourself stand out? It's a never ending battle.
I agree. I think this industry does really good at weeding some people out with the amount of unpaid work that you have to do.
Oh,
If you're just in it for the money, like I can tell you every job I've not been paid for, but I can also tell you the main lessons I learned from that job.
Well, I go
The
back and
other
forth on that though, because for us, we don't have paid internships. That wasn't a thing. And again, we can talk into how they should be paid, this, that, the other thing. My counter to that, having gone through an internship that was unpaid, that the value was in what I learned, and I actually had a coach who mentored me. Um, Versus, when you get paid, you need to do a job. And I would ask interns, 'cause we didn't pay straight up. I'm not going to pay you at Yale, but you're going to come spend a semester, and the goal is that you're going to give me time. I'm going to give you knowledge to try to help you pass your CSCS and get a job. And it's going to be as intense as you want or not. And so when people go through there, oh, I think I should get paid. I have this experience. Well, then go get paid. If at any point in the internship, and we actually had one kid who was so good, he got picked up mid internship. Like, great. He's like, are you mad at me that I left the internship? It's like, why? The goal of the internship was to get you a job. You're
Mhm,
coming to me because you don't have a job. I'm going to give you the time to show you how to do this thing better. But at the same time, you don't walk into math class and ask your teacher to pay you. You're here because you don't know how to do it. And
mhm,
when you come here, we'll sit there, we'll do seminars, we'll bring in speakers, we'll get you coaching experience on the floor. All of these things that, when you graduate, I was like, you're going to have to pay to go to a seminar. You're going to have to pay to go to a workshop. I'm not going to make you pay to come here. Just get food, housing, and whatever. And for 6 to 8 weeks, let's try to make you the best you can. And so the pay thing is really interesting. And anybody that thinks that they're not paid enough, then go get it. I
mhm.
don't I don't know anybody who's like, "Yeah, I'm flush." Even at the
I
highest levels, people are stressed out about pay, but if you think you need to get paid more, go get it.
100%. I had to pay to go across to America, and that was like that was visas, that was planes, that was food, the housing, like everything. Like I had to pay out of pocket. It's expensive, but in my head, I was like, I'm only going to get this one opportunity to go across to America, Division 1 school, coach under Ron McKeefrey, like intern under him, and I'm more than willing to pay for that because it's got me here. I've done countless amount of interviews. I've done workshops, conferences because of that experience, and that I yes, it sucked to pay for, but it's invaluable the amount of return I've gotten from it.
Yeah, well, did you pay or did you get an investment?
Yes, investment.
If you went to Coach Mack and you walked in there, and again, your attitude was, I deserve to be paid, I guarantee you the same lessons that you shared with me before we got on here wouldn't have stuck. Again, it seems like
100%.
you positioned your career well where you've been very receptive to the things that you've committed to. And that's probably the bigger lesson, too, for some of the coaches that are listening. It's an investment. If you know that, I mean, I don't know dollar wise, but let's go thousands of dollars to come to the United States. Well, we pay thousands of dollars
Easily.
to go to college. Well, what was an investment? And then I bet you right now, if you emailed Coach Mack, would he get back to you?
Oh,
So
I've got his number.
yeah, but like that's an investment because I'll tell you right
Mhm,
now, I call him. I haven't made the investment to his program stuff. He's not picking my phone up the same way, and those things are earned. And if you were a jerk or you weren't a receptive student, he wouldn't. But what he has done and what his whole kind of gospel is paying it forward. He's teaching those lessons, but it was earned. You came
mhm,
and you studied under him, and that was the same thing. I still have students from 10 years ago that are now directors. They're big time. I joke, don't ever be a guru. I'm going to call you out, but they're great coaches. But they gave me 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks
mhm.
in time in New Haven. But that's going to carry a lifetime. And so if you think that your opportunity is an investment, Roger that, go get it. But if you have any hesitation or doubt, I went to an Alan Cosgrove seminar, Perform Better in Rhode Island, and I remember whatever it was, call it a couple $100. He said, "I want you to do the thing. I want you to be here today, take notes, and you're going to have an aha moment. And there's a value to every aha in your career." He's like, "I want you to send me an email at this one." He put up on the board, and he's like, "When you make your money back." Let's just say it was
Mhm.
$500. And he's like, "And then I want you to email me when your aha made you, like, it was 3 or 4 times." So for me, like, I go in and it was all about billing. I'm never going to do packages. Everything's monthly subscriptions. Boom. I go back to Newport. I'm crushing it. I'm making more money than ever. $500 from people I wouldn't have had. Boom. Coach Cosgrove, $500. A couple weeks later, now it's exponentially going. Again, aha moment. So that's an important thing for people to know, is that just because you didn't make money in the moment, that might be an aha that you integrate into your practice. You've probably forgotten most of the stuff that Coach Mack gave you back in the day, but it created a platform for you to now learn even more stuff, to be even more
I
receptive.
can't
Say again.
with packing, I can't find it, but there's usually a black notebook of all the lessons I've learned from Coach Mac. Every time he would speak, I would just write. I would look at him and just write because I knew that that was going to be something that I needed
Yeah.
in the future as well.
But think about what you said. You have a notebook, but right now, in front of everybody on the show, what are the top 3 things in
Top
your
three
brain?
things.
You're going to think right now. You just look to the side. So now you're starting to think. You're going into your cognitive recall, and there's going to be 2 or 3 things, not to devalue the others. That's why you have to go back and reread.
Mm,
That's learning. Learning is different than education. Learning and training. Oh, great. Everybody should write a periodized program. Cool. That's education. Well, learning is how am I going to put this in the real world? But like you just did, I mentioned Coach Mack. Your eyes go to the side. You start thinking about it, and I bet you, if that black book was behind you, you'd be like, "Wait, let me pick the 1 or 2 things," because
mhm,
that's really what mentorship is. And we are probably closer to apprenticeships at this point, where it's not about just going and spending 6 months at
mhm,
UW. It's what did you learn, and just like a master electrician or welder, you have to build those things. And again, you probably have learned more from him after the internship than
mhm.
you just in that moment. But it's all grown off your base relationship that you started when you made the investment in yourself and your career.
100%. And that's well, it's like I think it's like you touched on, it's all about the mentality that you go into it as well. I had 6 to 8 weeks to do the best I can, but I went in with the mentality of I've got 6 to 8 weeks to let them know who I am. And the first, so Coach Mac introduces everyone and it's like, okay, round the table, you're going to tell me what you aim to achieve in here and what your goal is. When it came to me, I gave them my elevator pitch and I was like, I'm here to make your job easier. That was it. And by the end, he does his exit interviews, and he said, the way that you set up the weight room, the way that you, after a session was done, you set up for the next session, made it so that my time in my office was a bit longer so I could do more of the stuff that I need to get done. And it goes back to that. His recall on things as well is very important because it teaches me, okay, you did that really well, continue that. And
Yeah.
like this podcast started because of him. During that exit interview, he was like, I want you to start a podcast. I want you to speak to as many coaches, as many professionals as possible from that. After my podcast with Coach Mac, he we spent half hour just going over little elements of the podcast that I could do better to grow more. And like his learning never stops and his coaching never stops either.
Yeah. But again, you're a student to the game as much as you're trying to put it forward with the podcast, and that's what's so important. I can give you examples where people were put in awesome situations. Bill Kramer came to Yale for the day, like he's in our office for 12 hours. You're an intern. Would you ask him a question? We had people that didn't want to go talk to the old guy, and you're like,
Mm,
Roger that. Like, got it. You're not ready to learn. You're not ready. And again, if you're entitled or if you start to think that, you know everything, that's a curse because everything that you're describing with Coach Mack came from a mentor that wants to pay it forward, but then a student that wants to try to not only, I'm sure, you said that and you made it easier, but also he's learning as well too to have a student like how do you make the most of it? Because I'm sure, just as I do, you take pride in where your students go and what your students do and the
mm,
legacy that they leave. And so that's what's really, really important is that you're always pushing it forward. And then your individual push is only as far as it can go. Well, now you need to have, your disciples or people from your coaching tree that you're like, oh yeah, they came through Coach Mack or they came through so whoever. And that's what I think, again, the older you get, you take a lot of pride in that legacy. And also if you came out and you weren't so great, he probably let you know too. Like that
mhm.
was
Oh,
a really
100%.
different conversation. And you need that honest feedback. If you want to be elite, here's what you have to do. But realize being elite's tough. So you need people to hold you accountable.
Oh, one of the most heartbreaking things that Coach Mark said to me was, "You are a good coach, but your voice is too small." And that kind of took me back because, like, I'm 5'8". Obviously, I'm small, but he was like, you need to project yourself a little bit more. You're a great coach, but these are six plus guys. Like you're tiny compared to them. Let's fucking build on that voice then, because then you can have that chart, like that structure where people know you as that guy that you have. He's a coach.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. One of our drills that we did in our internship was called the Pantera drill. Pantera drill was you're at one end of the turf and then you're at the other end, 40 end. So I put the senior coach at the end and we crank Pantera. Like we're talking old school, heavy duty, just drums are going, high frequencies. So in general, bass beats, you can get a word or two in between the bass beat, but the high frequency drumming really drowns out the kind of softer voices. And so we would talk about a level one coaching voices. I'm talking to you, hey, let's go. Let's get this rack. I want you to lock it in. Boom, we're at the rack. It's very coaching in nature, soft affect, in and out of tones, very even keel. Well, your coaching voice, and again, probably popularized by Scott Cochran, is the like, here we go, bah, bah, bah. So you have to figure out how to have that high tempo tone. Females struggle at first, but then they figure it out where they can
Mhm.
hit those notes, but you can't strain your voice. And then for males, what do you think the problem was when they were going into that next gear of voice? What do you think it was?
Too authoritarian?
You sound like an ass. Like you just sound angry. And so when you watch Coach Mack, you probably say, "All right, let's go." Bah, bah, bah. So there's a jovial tone.
Mhm.
There's an intensity and a tempo, and even just in the body mechanics, you can't just stand there as a coach and just be all verbal. Your whole caricature has to come alive because now you're motivating. People are laughing, you're high fiving, you're starting to bring the juice and the energy. That's exhausting. And so in the
Mhm.
Pantera drill, I want you to read me a workout card from 40 yards away. The coaches on the other end are going to write down what it is because there's also a safety element, right? Like racket, get out of the way. If you're like, you sound like a mouse in a room full of, behemoths, that's a safety thing. So we would do practice Pantera and, day 2, 3 of the internship, everybody's voice is just raspy and they got camp voice and, they're struggling. But then you find it. And so it's that upper level, upper threshold where you can really, really project, but without the bad tone or not project so high that now it sounds screechy and demanding.
Mhm.
But I mean, that's such a simple skill that every intern had to work on, had to work on.
100%. As soon as I got home, I was like, okay, let's build this voice. Cause like he was right. Like I thought I was being like amped up and extra, but that was amped up and extra for me. It wasn't really that level that athletes need to really go. And again, it goes back to that cognitive thing. 30 seconds in, your blood isn't rushing to your head. You need blood everywhere else. So your brain kind of takes a back seat and switches off for a little bit. So then I need to simplify my words down as much as possible so they can still understand it.
Yep.
So it's again building that volume, but also knowing, okay, I can't be super technical in what I'm saying. I need to say go faster, fast, move, up, rack, down, like simple cues to make them still understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and even just think about everything you said, up, rack, down, having things end in consonants makes it
Mhm,
punch through the air a little bit easier. So if you're trying to have get into hip extension and then I want you to it just gets caught up in the noise. And again, if you have a silent weight room or if you have a loud weight room, the point is, like you said, their brain is thinking about something else. I'm giving you one or two verbal cues, or I'm going to demonstrate something visually, give a hand signal, or it's going to be short staccato, bang, rack, up. Hey, everybody ready on this next set? I'm going to scream up. You guys push with the weight of God. Lift these bars up. Ready? Up. And then all the bars go up. So figuring
mhm,
that out. But that takes time. And Coach Matt gave you that platform to practice, but then also go back and find your own. And I think being genuine, I mean, again,
mhm.
every coach has a different style. I never thought I was a screamer and yeller. I've been told I'm pretty intense. Um, but like I think I'm pretty approachable. Come on, like let's get after it. But understanding when you see me coach, say women's golf is going to be different than football, and making sure that you have multiple hats. A lot of
Mhm.
coaches, we had one guy from like Texas, and he was like, "Let's go clam shells." It's like read the room, like love it, love the enthusiasm. Got it. But like, hey, let's warm up into it. Oh, okay. Do you think it was a little much? I was trying to bring the energy. You did. Just like we're warming up. So like, and then so then you move them into the appropriate sections. So it's great. But I think the biggest thing is show me the caricature or the coaching style, coaching hat where I can walk in and your athletes love working with you.
Mhm.
That's the thing too. That doesn't take any time. Like people,
Mhm.
you can in your career, it might take you 5, 10 years, but if you have good soft skills, I can't wait to come see Coach Manny. I want to, and I understand too that that's a thing for me that I want to go work with Coach so and so. I want to work with Coach so and so. I take that as a compliment, not that like, oh, I'm the senior coach. If they interface better and they can get them more receptive, they're going to push through. They're going to be able to achieve better results because they're so committed to that coach that shows care. And committed can be that you go to practice. Committed could be that
Mhm.
you show up early or that you have protein shakes or that you have their workouts. Doesn't look like football repackaged. There's a lot of ways to show care, but that's what I always tell the younger coaches. It's
100%.
gonna take you a lifetime to figure out the X's and O's, but you can be really, really committed to your clients and to your athletes. You can do that today. Go get it.
The the most surprising thing, so in the US, you've got that coach Newman, coach Mac, coach AJ. Like that's something that happens and it's expected from their athletes. In the UK and Europe, that's not the case. Like I was never used to being called Coach Manny. So like the first time that happened, I was like, what is this feeling that I'm feeling? It's like
Yeah,
it was so simple, but like it kind of showed me that they respected me enough. Because again, they'll only call you when they respect you.
right,
It's expected of them, but they don't call every intern coach,
right,
right? So when I got Coach Manny, and that was like a weekend, I was like, what is this?
right.
Like he respects me? What? But like it was just that little shift of like someone who didn't know who I was, didn't know any of my background, but respected me enough to say, Coach Manny, what do I do next? I was like, damn, like he's into what I'm doing.
Yeah, and if I had to guess, Coach Mac had a little bit to do with that. If I had to guess, that was earned. And what you'll find is whether it's coach, as you mentioned, overseas, and again, say you're working in the tactical population, they're not going to call you a coach. Um, your nickname, your whatever designation, there's a how do I put it? There's a weight that comes with that. Like you are now a coach, and I think especially younger coaches who those lines get really blurry at 22, 23, where they want to bro it up, they want to do this, that, the other. You're not and having a hard time with that. And again, that's what's going to tell me whether you're going to be a professional about this or not. That's fine. Everybody's on different scales and everybody's different times, but when we go out there, the rules are pretty black and white, whether it's the college level or if it's in the personal level. Like again, you're the coach, you're the authority figure, you're the person with the knowledge that they're coming seeking your expertise. That should be the profession. And again, if you let the profession down, that's not just a you thing, that's all of us. And so remembering that comes with a weight.
Hmm. I agree. And like now that I speak to Coach Mark, and he's like, I did the conference in Italy, and we were speaking, like we were texting each other, and he was like, "Oh, big shot Manny now," and like that to me, I was like, I doubt it. But it was like he's like now giving me some like props for what I'm doing as well, and it's kind of like this is a weird situation because I've always seen him up here, and now he's like slowly trying to bring me up as well, and he's giving me like, oh, I've put this out. What do you think? Like he's got he's released this platform where he's getting some feedback from his previous interns, and like I was the first one on the app. For me, that was weird, but he respects my honesty because like, and I was honest with him as well. Like some of the stuff that we did in the program could have been better, and I called him out on it, and I was like, this could have been better because of this. And I think by both coach and intern being honest with each other builds that respect as well, and that again develops the industry and what we're doing as coaches.
100%. But also your feedback is earned because you have
Mhm.
shown him lots of people have opinions. But again, the feedback that he's asking for you is through, relationships grow at the speed of trust. Trust grows at the speed of action. You've done a lot of things prior to being on that platform and asking for your feedback and go to do that. And I laugh too when he says, oh, you're big time. Because I did the same thing. Just remember, you were an intern once. And
Mhm.
we haven't talked about this, but every intern, and I forget where I picked this up from, in general, from a cognitive standpoint, if I ask you, write down this podcast or do whatever, you're going to take notes. Most interns, when you say, I want you to do a weekly reflection, we're going to grade it. And I'm going to assign you to another senior coach. We're going through it. Week one, I was in the weight room. We clean lots of things. They kind of sound like they, hit their head and, they're just reading back a list of tasks and they're saying, we worked out. We did this plan. I got protein powder. Um, Interesting by week 3 or 4, it's that when we set up the room, we weren't really getting out in time and we weren't hitting our numbers the way we thought. We think that the coaching has changed the practice schedule. By week 8, they're not even talking about the things day to day they're seeing. So that's what I think, and Coach Mack would probably attest. Some interns really, really get stuck in the minutia because that's all they can handle. But until that becomes so routine that now you scale out and you're like, oh wow, here's the group dynamic. Here's what's going on outside of athletics. there was a fight at a party or there was something at a bar. Well, now how are we going to handle that when they come to the weight room? The young intern, when they start, they're just so zeroed in and trying to focus on that one thing. That's important that you're paying attention to that and then building out kind of that
Mhm.
view, week over week. And it sounds like, again, too, from your perspective, you're now building your own platform. He's whatever. So now you're collaborating in that drill sergeant and, kind of cadet to, now you're both working together. And at some point you will pass him. At some point he'll retire. You'll be an active coach and he will not be. And as that handoff happens, again, he's going to probably be tougher on you in his retirement than he is now, because again, you're the legacy, that he spent every minute, with you was away from his family. Every minute that
Mhm.
he spent talking to you was away from, his close friends nearby. So again, you guys have to have a huge level of honor to that to try to make it better. And that's all you can do every day to try to push the field and yourself.
And he's very much like what you've said, but he does it with certain drills. So he'll assign drills to people. If you're able to do it, you that's your drill. From now on, that is your drill. And then he'll then build out responsibilities based on that. So say I got the return to play guys. It was just me in the weight room with the return to play guys, or we'd be out in the field doing conditioning. We'd be doing movement based things. Again, I was under coach Ben Creamer, but I was left alone completely. That was my area, and that was exactly what he did. He put me in 2 weeks in, first time really speaking to the Division One athletes, all of them bigger than me, and I was put in a situation where I was in the gym by myself coaching them. I was like, this is very uncomfortable. I had to keep time. I had to keep exercises. I had to make sure that I run smoothly because an hour and a half later, they were out for they were out in the field with their positions. So that was like okay. And there was a point where Coach Ajik walks in and he was like, "Let's go, Coach Manny," and I was like, "I'm doing okay then."
Right. Right.
But then
Yeah.
from then, these responsibilities built out.
Well, they're earned. You did a good job because, again, it's nice that he said, let's go. But again, I would find it hard to believe that that was an accident. That, when you
Mm,
run that internship, you need to create an environment where people can learn, but it's got to be an etch a sketch. You're going to make
mm.
mistakes. You're going to do it.
Oh,
So
I
let's
made so many,
yeah,
so many.
but nobody died. Like nobody got hurt, and that's where in the mentorship and apprenticeship is using your senior coaches check. Oh, Coach man, but you better believe that he was checking on some other things. The thing that he said to you was a byproduct of the efforts that you put in. But if things were not right or going sideways, I'm sure that coach would have interjected. But
Mm,
again, through your efforts and through your actions, those opportunities were rewarded. And I think that gets back. I want to bring back that point that you said. You came to that internship. You could have totally just sat there and not done anything and just expected through osmosis that you were going to be a
mhm,
better coach, but you didn't. You got after it. What started with you said you want to make his day easier. It got into you've been given the responsibilities to train the young men that are in front of me to make them better. And in some cases, some of those kids probably went pro. So now not only they, their money, their income, their future families and their lives are going to be impacted long after college. So that's a huge weight to carry, but it was earned through the actions that you did starting at day one, it sounds like.
mhm. Yeah, a lot. Almost all of them are in the NFL now, and it's so weird to think that we were just like chilling a couple of years ago, and now they're fucking they're big times.
Yeah, when you think about that 3 to 4 year, and again now with NIL, I mean that's another podcast of, you're
Mm,
talking from 18 years old to NFL. That whatever that gap is, you can have 3 or 4 new coaches. You're away from your family. You go from being broke as a joke to potentially being a millionaire. There's a lot of physical development that goes on. There's a lot of psychological. It's very disorienting when all of a sudden these new people come out of the woodworks, and that's where too the coaches that really build a bond, they'll still reach out to you. I mean, again, some of the guys that just got drafted this past draft class reaching me out. Hey, I remember this workout. I remember, when I did this as a freshman, you said you made us watch this video about, conditioning and this, that, and those again are the impacts. And that's why we like being
mhm,
coaches, right? I mean, it's a platform for education, mentorship, and again, trying to make people better and helping people. What
100%.
content, what science you use is up to, each profession. But in general, we like to help people.
100%. And like when athletes are speaking to me, I always make sure to say, you did it because it was you. You're the one that did it. I simply gave you some workout plans. Not to dumb down what I do, but that's all I did. You did the reps, you did the sets, you went through the physical exertion to do it. I had a very small, so if you make it, that is on your effort. And I think a lot of coaches that I see on TikTok, Instagram, all these social media platforms are solely based on this is the guy I have, I did this. And then they build out their roster depending on that. And I was like, that cool, that's you're making really good money off it, but that's just not the way I want to put myself out.
Yeah. I mean, I have lots of thoughts on that. And again, you're, especially at the end of a career or getting ready for the combine, you are the final step in what was a lot of other people's work and the individual person. I mean, so very similar to what you said. I would always say to the athletes, when they say whatever, well, I'll take credit for every tackle that I made. And they're like, well, you didn't. I was like, well, it's all you. You made everything. Now, I'm glad you listened to me. And I would also say, like, if you could help me out, like, let some of the other freshmen that don't listen preach the gospel, right? At the end of the day, because I won't ever yell at an athlete. One
Mm,
of my coaches that I had growing up, the worst thing you could ever do is just be quiet, and just that silence is deafening. And again, I would say to athletes, I'm sorry that I haven't explained to you why this is important for you. I get nothing out of it. I have lots of years of coaching left. You have 3 to 4 years of football, or you have, whatever of lacrosse or whatever the sport is. I want you to invest in yourself and understand the importance of this weight training session, of this nutrition, of this flexibility, of this sports medicine. But I failed you. I haven't gotten you. No, I'll get my act together. And again, you're dealing with people that are under the age of 25, so they don't have a fully formed brain. So you have to help them in kind of understanding what we do today impacts tomorrow and the people around me.
mm,
But that's part of the deal of being a coach is you have a lot of other things besides the weights is easy. I can get you on a
yeah,
plan to get you stronger. I can get you on a plan to make you faster, but it's very hard when there's lots of disruptors and distractions or competing. You know,
voices. Yeah.
yeah. Like one of my buddies in Power Five was like, yeah, the agents come in now with the NIL. They're like, listen, even if it's a cover three, you're going to press this receiver because we need to get 6 interceptions so you can get drafted higher. Like, thank God I don't have to deal with that. That's a new dynamic now because they're right. Like at the end of the day, they're trying to get paid. And whether it's through the NIL or up their draft stock, you basically college now is a mess at the highest level. It's free agency every year. And some
Yeah.
of the conferences act as like junior conferences and feeder systems, probably similar to soccer, how they have Premier League and they have those other that's what it reminds me a lot of that you just can't make the money here at the lower leagues. But if you prove yourself, someone can come down and scoop you up for a better price.
I think that's, and I watched the interview with Coach Nick Saban, and that's what he's having a big issue with. It's all of these athletes are more externally motivated by what could potentially happen for them performing, and they're not loyal to that one thing, that one program.
Yeah. I mean, most of sports banks on a central principle that in competition, the team is trying to win.
Mm,
And the first paper that was written on that was by, I believe it was Seth Rottenberg back in the 50s and 60s. So it was baseball, economics in baseball. So you can look it up. And that's a famous paper because don't forget, athletics wasn't really commercialized, especially in the college setting until the, post World War II time. So people had time and there was an industrial might to be able to do, things. But now suddenly when you go into competition that the goal isn't to win the game, and that's where fantasy sports or kind of this in-game prop gambling. I need this person to get these many touchdowns, this many strikes out, whatever the outcome is. That is a new phenomena for sport to figure out how it's going to handle it. And college, back when Yale and Princeton and Rutgers were playing football, there wasn't the same money.
hmm
It's not the same now, where you're talking about $1 billion TV contracts. And again, you can get into a debate of what should they make, what then shouldn't they, should everybody at the university get paid, or what is the sport product. But I hope that it gets figured out because my sneaking suspicion is in the next 3 to 5 years, um, it will go one way or another where they're going to have to branch off and have their own league. So similar to the European club system, maybe something like that has to happen. But I mean, already there's talks about Power Five football doing their own thing away from the NCAA. But I just think that that's a very, very important time in our history that we're living right now,
hmm
and coaches are going to play a huge role. How would you write a program now for someone in an NIL, situation? Go back to UW and do today as it is, or 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I'm going to develop a freshman, sophomore, juniors, whatever. Now you've got 10 months, maybe. Like, how would you do it? You can't program, you can't have the same training goals. So coaches are going to be front and center.
100%. And I think that's where that, again, theory comes into practical and how they both mesh. And I'd really be interested in listening more about the developing the athlete, where it's more them than it is us.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I know, we talked about it a little bit, but developing the athlete, that project, that book that I worked with Dr. Kramer on, he came to me, 2 years ago. There we go. There we go. Yep. Uh, that book came out of really him saying, science and practice. It's like, yeah, I think every strength coach has that on their shelf. It needs to be better than that. I'm like, like, why are we starting with that goal? Whatever. He's like, no, right now. And if you look at that book cover, that the
Mhm,
thing on that cover is all those arrows have to be pointed in the right direction. So I ask you right now, if you made one of those arrows, one being sports medicine, one being strength and conditioning, in your current institution, is it pointed in the same direction? Does everybody have the three C's? When I say
mhm,
we need to develop this athlete, are we all in agreement? And so this book, the hope was is that it could be like almost a field manual for a soccer coach who says, hey, you know, I need to get my support staff organized. Or it's the strength coach saying, hey, you know, sport coach, you have unrealistic goals. I remember one coach told me, he's like, we need to get everybody better. And I was like, cool, let's recruit better players. Everybody jumps like a tomato and they're, 5'10", and all your all Americans are 6'2". Like, we need to change it up and work together and build a roadmap. And I got a message on Instagram from someone in Kenya that said, I
mhm,
want to get your book to help with my program. And like, that was a huge moment for us, because what we hoped was to make a language. What we hoped was to provide that framework, because you and I can talk rep sets, even kilos and pounds. I can flip in and out of it. You and I know it. But if we go grab, say, I don't know, a curling coach, are they going to know what
mhm,
training is? And then more importantly, why it matters, and how they're going to support their staff. So in the book, when we talk about the composite, that's that. And we write out, like, you sit with every shareholder in the room, what is going on. Example I can give was that we have injuries that are high, turn to sports medicine. None of the guys come in for treatment. Well, why aren't the guys coming in for treatment? Well, I don't know. Well, come to find out that, if treatment is 10 to 2 and everybody's in class, well, then we you know can't get
mhm,
treatment. Let's open treatment times in the morning or the afternoon. Wow, guess what? Treatment time, changing the treatment time increased the amount of treatment, and we also reduced the injury. So we didn't need to change the weight training program. We just needed to do some of the corrective stuff. But then if that meeting hadn't happened, I don't know if that would have been as effective. So that's really what our book is about. And then at the end of the day, you're going to make this great plan. You talked about periodization a couple times today. Cool. At the end of the year, did it work? And
mhm,
I'm not saying it to be a jerk or to have an ego. You said you were going to get people stronger. Can you measure it? You said you were going to get buy-in. Well, you can't measure everything. Well, I don't know. Let's do a survey. Let's talk. Ask your athletes. Get an exit interview. Which coach you mentioned? I want to work with Coach Manny. I don't want to work. Okay. You can either be pissed off about it, or you can say, I need to work on my soft skills. Maybe we need to change it. So the book is really about facilitating conversations. And then we wanted to take it one step further, where we'll be hosting seminars. So what we'll start here locally, kind of in the United States. When I say local, we'll try to cover each coast. But then, the hope is to kind of expand it, because between my experiences, Dr. Radimus's experience, and Dr. Kramer's, there's a lot of research, but there's also a lot of practical. And my hope is that we sit down and we have these seminars. Hey, Coach Manny, give me the 5 things right now that that are really that you're struggling with. And the next person. Okay, here are the 5 things. And we're not going to try to, you know, cure world hunger in a day. But
mhm,
what we're going to try to do is make sure that if you come to the clinics, is that you are better when you leave. Either in, this is how we're going to coach a hang clean. This is how we're going to coach a push press. This is how we're going to build a recovery roadmap. This is how I'm going to have a conversation with my parents that I'm interacting with, and really give tools so that people come in, whatever their things were, and then when they leave. And again, that's something that I'm very excited about, because you don't know. I mean, I told you, when you have a brain tumor and you live year to year on a scan, you're thinking about what's your legacy, what can you do, how can you make people better. And I can't think of many other professions aside, outside of coaching, that can have such a wide impact to so many people, if that makes sense.
mhm.
So that's really
No, it
where
does.
it will continue to grow, year over
Yeah.
year.
No, again, it goes back to that thing of communication where if I'm coming into a team, my first thing to talk about with the coach, the head coach, is me and you need to hash out any differences, because we need to communicate the whole time. I do not want to run this program if me and you aren't, again, pointing the same way. And again, physio times at some clubs in the UK, that's not a thing that happens, but we can reach out to physios. And again, because of the connection I've built, if I have a question, I can ask someone, and I have done before, and like I was able to get an answer straight away, as opposed to, okay, go see a physio. Physio takes months to get into in the UK. What speed up the process is by communicating with each other.
But where did you learn to do that? Because that makes sense. Everybody agrees, speak to the coach. But how do you navigate those conversations? But how do you nurture it and steward it? Because a lot of young coaches, make sure you have a good relationship with your head coach. I do. And I'm like, really? Do they like cats or dogs? And they're like, what does that have to do with soccer? Well, no, it's relationships. Like outside of the domain, you said you trained the kids, but how did you do it? I think what you're getting to is about building those relationships and maintaining them. I don't know if every young coach knows how to do that.
Yep.
Short of, I went and sat and talked to the coach. He said this, she said that. Cool. Do they like crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Hmm.
I don't know.
Ooh, always crunchy. Always crunchy.
No, more importantly, are they allergic? Like, did you even know? And so, like, go through it. These are the things. That's the detail of just getting. Did
Yeah.
you? Okay, go back and ask them if they like peanut butter and jellies. Go see, like, build that time, and don't talk to coaches only when there's a problem.
Hmm.
Build that time, build that trust. Coach, I'm going to go do this. And that stuff, that same action you're taking without the conversation is going to have way more impact on the coach if they know that you care. Every sport coach wants the strength coach to care about their plan. They want the best program for their team. And maybe they're educated, maybe they're not, maybe they're educated enough to be a little bit dangerous. But they want people around their team that give a crap. And so
Hmm.
that's where having that formal meeting, what is the document that you walk out of that meeting with? When do
Yep.
you follow up? Is this a coach that likes everything digital? I mean, I had coaches that were like, we want to get in the team builder. We want to see the reports. Boom, boom, boom. I want to know tonnages. I want to know loads. I want to know everything. And then I had an old coach and was like, Tom, you let me know if anybody needs to be yelled at. And then the rest of the time in our conversation that we'd have, it was just all talking about, rowing and about the water and, what he was doing with his family. That's it. And now, sure enough, when we had an athlete come and spill a protein shake all over the floor, that happens. But then start saying that, it's the coach's job to clean it up and it was being really rude. That coach dropped the hammer, a hammer like I've never seen, where he was like, he will apologize to you. He will not use. I was like, coach, it's a one time, it's a honest mistake. No, that's not what we have here in our programs. Like, Roger that. But that was how many
Mhm.
conversations of one-on-one. Hey, I'll let you know, everything's going good. We're going great. That's what young coaches, you got to spend that time.
It's observation as well. And again, it's something so simple that you can pick up if you just watch. But like every coach that walks in the morning, hi coach, how you doing? To each other. No one said it to Coach Mac. And I was like, hey Coach Mac, how's your day? How are you doing today? It's so fucking simple, but no one did it because he demanded this presence. So people were like, oh, he's good. He's walking in, he's Coach Mac, he does what he does, but no one actually stopped him and was like, "Hey, Coach Mark, how you doing today? How was your day?"
Yeah.
And like, I still remember it vividly. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and be like, "I'm good, Manny. I'm good," and that was it. That was the full extent. But again, it builds that rapport and it builds that relationship with the head coach and the coach, where like our job is also dependent on them.
Right.
If they like us, they'll keep us. We'll go as far as we can with them. If you were hired to do this role and you do it well, but he for some reason doesn't like you, you can be just as easily out.
Yeah, and again, why are you out? Is because you've reached the end of your time, because that happens. Sometimes you got to fly the nest. Other times it's you've learned everything that you can. But trying to every day go in, and I think that that's another thing too, is when you walk in your day, what is your goal? So
Hmm.
many young coaches get caught up in the wash. I'm going to UW today. I'm going to practice. I'm going to lift. How are you getting better? Well, I don't know. I was like, you think it's going to be an accident, to be elite? Okay, what's your 15 minutes you're going to do of reading? What's your 15 minutes that you're going to reach out, give someone gratitude? What's the thing that you're going to do today on the floor technically? How are you going to coach this differently? How are you going to listen? I mean, go into a weight room. I want you to coach today, but your hands have to stay in your pockets. You can't use your hands. Try that.
Hmm.
See how that goes, right? People start flopping around. Or, hey, you need to go in. I just want you to listen to the weight room. I just want you to hear it. Or I want you just to watch, but not say anything. So all of those different domains, those are little things that you got to start compiling day after day. The compound effect is real one way or
Hmm.
another. And I've seen that where people just, you're going to be a great first assistant. You're going to be an awesome high school coach. You're going to be great. You're great for 4 hours on the floor, but then you get crispy. I needed people that could give me 40 hours of floor time, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and be absolutely tough as nails and their programming, their coaching standard of excellence, but also have that soft skill that if something comes up that, they can handle it. And it's not easy, but by definition, being elite shouldn't be for everybody. And you are the five friends you surround yourself with. And that's probably, again, what Coach Mack was trying to instill with you of that, how he carried himself and, did that. You probably didn't know when he had bad days. You didn't know when he was having troubles at home. You just show up and grind. You got to
Yeah.
do it. And then again, we'll sort it out later, but you are a performer in coaching, whether you like it or not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I always say you have to leave everything at the door. As soon as you walk through that doorway, all your problems stop, and you care about those guys that are in there with you.
And it's not that it goes away. I think that's an important
Yeah,
distinction. It's not that your feelings aren't real, but just like a surgeon, can you imagine if a heart surgeon was like, "Man, I'm having a terrible day. Did you see the news?" Like, "No, no, no, no." Like, you need to be really focused. Like, you need to be in your game. But that's called being a professional, right?
mhm,
If you can show up on good days and perform, and when you want to, and when versus when you don't, like that's a hobby. That's cool. Like plenty of people like to lift and dabble in it, but to be a pro, it's day in and day out. I always joke like, you think Taylor Swift is having an off day? She's like, this Eras tour makes me a lot of money, but I'm going to cut this set short. I'm going to be a little off key. Like nobody cares. You need to perform, and they're coming to you for a product. And the higher up you go, when Coach Mack was probably an intern or when he first came out, the stage is a little bit smaller, and that's where you're
mhm,
proving yourself. But by the time you get to be in a director role, and for all intents and purposes on a football team, that's a corporation. The head coach is the CEO, but you're the secondary head coach. You have to instill and proclaim the values and all that stuff, and you got to get them stronger, and you got to make sure you have those relationships. So I mean, that's a huge stage, and I've never made it to that level where again, you're on the TV every single day, that there's a national game, and people are watching that product. So I can't imagine the stress he had, but you probably didn't know. You
yeah.
just
I
every
was
day
oblivious to it.
be a pro.
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction, and it's just clicked for me. I've had that haha moment where we are pros as well. Like we are just pro coaching, and that's never really sunk in. I've just looked at it as like I'm coaching today. I'm potentially making these guys better
Or worse, like
or
because
worse.
you weren't organized, because you had an off day, because you ran a little bit late, because you didn't check that number, because whatever the thing is, there's some interaction you'll have today with an athlete that on some scale can be measured, and you have to go in every day trying to do the best that you can, and it's
100%.
tough. And I always had a hard time though, and this isn't trying to sound like I'm standing on a soapbox. The minute that you think that you're owed a certain team or that you should be a certain way, that to me is a ginormous red flag versus being in the service industry of, I'm here to work with my athletes. And I know sometimes the universities can play that out. They're like, all holistic approach, but meanwhile, like half our staff's on food stamps and they make $20,000 a year, and our interns aren't really learning; they're just being used. I think that um, that idea of a servant mentality doesn't mean that you're just trampled over. It doesn't mean that you should be used and abused. It means that your job literally is to show up today and help the person in front of you, team in front of you, reach a new physiological, psychological, or performance level that they couldn't do otherwise. And the only difference is if I'm the coach or you're the coach, one of us is getting paid and the other one isn't. And so, how do you build your brand? And not on social media. I mean, I have like
Mhm.
no media. And actually, some of the athletes that I work with say, we tried to look you up. You don't put much out there, even though you work with all these pro. Yeah, because I'm not here to fanboy my team. I think that if you want to share that we're working together, cool. But otherwise, we're in this to try to help you, not try to, use your brand as well. So I think that's a really important distinction. And you mentioned to it earlier too that you don't get the warm and fuzzies about that either. On my
No,
end, yeah.
I have to because of the podcast, but I'm not a big fan of social media. Like if my athletes are doing something cool, I'll repost it. I'll put it in my story, hype them up. But if I could just do that, I would love that. But because of the podcast and my business and all that stuff, I have to be somewhat active on it. But I hate social media. Hate it with
It's
a
just it's
passion.
Yeah, it's a fine line because I go through, it's a great platform to get messages out there, but it seems like a lot of people that have a lot of time are putting a lot of things out there where I sit there and be like, I don't really know about that. And especially any of the polarizing content of you should never do this exercise or you should do whatever. You're playing
Mhm.
into the clickbait of the algorithms. And I feel so bad for the upcoming coach right now because unless they're told to, have a filter, I mean, I remember growing up where, I was stealing journals from the University of Rhode Island kinesiology department, peer reviewed journals or the NSCA or, magazine. There were different kind of gatekeepers to information. Right now, you can go online and find anything you want, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so when you get a young coach who comes in with the latest and greatest, and you're like, yeah, but like you don't even know how to set up the rack. Like you don't know how to auto regulate. They just did 5 reps at 275. What's their max? And they kind of like look at you. And it's like, that's probably more important than, your banded tantrums or your, hamstring curl, whatever. Like get back to the basics, but it's tough. So I actually think that the mentorships are going to become more important because
Mm,
younger coaches will have to lean on senior coaches that are doing what they want to do to help navigate the space. Because even for me, it's confusing. You mentioned
mm,
recovery stuff. There's so much recovery stuff out there where, yes, the science is true, but the commercial product isn't validated. So now you're just wasting time.
again, it all comes back from like I love speaking to coaches who have been doing it for much longer than I have because although it's most stuff that I've listened to and I've heard, but there's different nuances that coaches have each that can give me a different piece of the puzzle and interpret a different way that now I can become better as well. And like because of the podcast and like if any coach ever messages me, I just info dump them because if they've asked me a question, it's because they're willing to learn. So I will go above and beyond to teach them all that I've learned, in a sense.
Yeah, that's important. You always got to be learning, and that's
Hmm.
where just again, I probably ask twice as many questions as I give out answers, but taking that time, and then also just having quiet time to really think, as you
Hmm.
mentioned, cognitive. That'll be 6 months, 8 months of me just going down a rabbit hole thinking about that, or whether it's recovery, or and what specific aspect, and then how does when you get deep down into the rabbit hole of kind of sensory motor stuff, well, how does that impact my coaching? So suddenly, when I think back to going to Wichita Falls, that kinesthetic feedback was probably better than a verbal cue and when to
Hmm.
do it. Like you said, that kind of that nuance. But watching great coaches, like when they command the floor, it's I don't know, it's just something really incredible to see a motivated group of individuals get after it, push their comfort zone for an hour, and then the room goes quiet and the lights come down and then it's just a weight room again. So it's really kind of that stage and that performance that still to this day, I love watching lift. I think it's great. It just gets me going. I start laughing, music gets pumping, and that's such an important role that we play too, kind of within someone's life. That the weight room's the sanctuary.
Yep.
The quote that friends may come and go, but 225 is 225, and that was in their starting strength book. Or I guess we'll
Well,
have to do a remake for the UK. Is that 100 kilos is 100 kilos?
yep.
So it's
There's nothing more humbling than watch college athletes prepare for a 225 test.
Oh yeah. Or we had Judgment Day was the max out. So it was the only time in the season where we would go and we're like calculating, we're doing the warm ups and okay, you're gonna go hit the single. And whether you put VBT on it or whether you just do it with the eyes, just see the hype. And I watch people at the bottom of a squat, say it like five and change. They get to the bottom. You saw the devil say, just sit down, and everybody started screaming, and it was like the whole volume of the room lifted up. And so it's like, oh, that's such a cool experience. And that's stuff that they'll remember for the rest of their life. You remember when I hit 405? You remember when I whatever? It's just a cool experience. And again, that's the soft side of the skill that you have to have. But also it's a 500-pound squat. They've never done it. You better make sure that they, have
They're safe.
technique. Yeah, you yell racket, they better know that they got to go down. So it's a cool experience and still, gets me going every day when I think I'm getting jacked up now. I need to go after this. So awesome.
225 test for you after. I like to end the podcast with two questions. What's your PR song? Is the first one.
Oh man. Depends what lift.
Ooh, I've never been asked that. We'll go squat, and then for me, bench is the hardest one because I see demons following me during bench. I hate bench. Um, so squat and bench.
I don't know. I kind of feel like anything in the like old Metallica pre-LimeWire. I'm dating myself, but yeah,
Wow.
Napster. Time. Like Master of Puppets, anything by Zach Wild, any of the pentatonic scales on squat, because you got to dig deep for those. When you get to the bottom, you have to make a conscious choice whether gravity's going to win or not. Bench, I don't know. Again, probably. I mean, anything. I'm probably a little more loose on that. I could go a couple ways, but we'll leave that one with any kind of the I'd say metal for any of the lifts. I'll tell you what though, for conditioning and cardio though, you got to have something with 100 and 180, 160 beat per minute. Otherwise, you
Mm.
just feel like yourself slowing down. Your cadence matches up to the audio. So I definitely need something with a beat for anything conditioning.
So I've got two different types of conditioning. I've got long conditioning where I'm doing like hours, hour plus, and I just like to do that.
Unfortunate to hear. That's really unfortunate to hear that you're doing conditioning
Yeah.
for hours and hours. That's not, you shouldn't punish yourself.
So I do that because of the dark side. That's the sole reason. I've once sat on a bike for 2 hours just pedaling, and I was like around about yellow to red zone heart rate the whole time. It was fucking. I hated it. I hated every second. I would obviously dip to catch my breath a little bit, but I was in between that zone the whole time, and I can pull up the thing as well. But and that slower cardio days, I like that for some reason. Chris Brown does it, and I
There you go.
don't know why. I don't know why. I hate that he gets me there, but he gets me there. And then Zach Bryan is actually a really good one for short, sharp conditioning. I'm just like 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Fucking go, let's go, Zach.
Yeah, I'll do anything just high tempo. You take your go to Spotify, 180 beats per minute playlist, and just let it rip. Because I won't be paying attention. And often too, I find especially now, so some of the Tabata protocols, the 2010s, some of the other ones when we have the ladders, we'll often pair that with the cognitive. So any audio is
Mm,
just serve as a distraction so that we can do kind of visual stuff. So it might be, on an iPad, or it might be doing some sort of card game, might be doing whatever, and then hop back on. So in the short bursts, and then on long distance ones though, in the off chance that I had to do something longer than 6 to 8 seconds, uh, on bike riding, I can get into even the podcasts. So trying to
mm,
think about just something else, and kind of again at 130, 140 beats per minute, we're just rolling. So and it's kind of fun. So I would just say on any of those long bike rides, that's what I would be thinking.
perfect. A last question. Was a piece of advice you would give new coaches wanting to come into this industry or just new coaches in this industry?
Stay humble and hungry. You're going to find people that have one, maybe both sometimes, but then to maintain it, and it's not a you make a decision stage. You got to every day. You got to earn it. So the humble and hungry, and I would challenge them if they're in my face, forward facing. How did you make it better? Were you humble? Did you listen? Did you take a program and tweak it again? Did you run its course? Did you ask the creator? Did you research it? Or are you just trying to make it your own? I mean, I think about when Coach Poliquin talked about just because you wear your underwear on the outside of your pants doesn't make it better. It's
Mm,
different. And that's what I see a lot right now. People are just rushing to do their own thing. They're rushing to do whatever, where there's literally, we have hundreds of years of physical training and physical culture that you need to research and do your history on. And there's nothing wrong with the sushi one on I'm forgetting the name on Netflix where they talk about making the sushi.
hmm.
So that
Yeah.
you want to talk about, yeah, 25 years. The dad didn't let him touch the fish. He had to cook the rice. That's how perfect the rice had to be. 25 years of cooking rice. And so I'll often say to young coaches, cook the rice, make it perfect. I want to walk in and see that everything's perfect, and now we can go and talk. And what happens is the good ones, they're so hard on themselves, you have to like pick them up because they're so analytical, which is fine, I'll take that. And then the hunger has to be a better coach, to the people that you serve, not hunger being fame and clicks. I don't know at what point, like, I remember on one interview someone was saying like, well, if they don't have a blank amount of followers, they're not an influencer. And it's like, well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Some of the best coaches I know can't even log onto the computer. So again, at some
I,
point, that became kind of the presence became a badge or certificate in and of itself. So hunger has to be that every time I see this coach, and I can think right now probably about like 5 or 10 coaches that are just young, hungry, that will make names, that will do it the right way. But I'll tell you right now, on a Sunday morning, they're out reading, or they're trying to talk to a coach like we're doing. They're constantly in a hurry, not rushing things, but there's a sense of urgency. And that's what I'd say to the young coaches is just stay humble and hungry. And if you're not sure, you call Coach Mac. My coaches call me. I still reach out to my coaches. Check yourself, check your ego. And if you're not sure, ask somebody and take that feedback. So definitely humble and hungry.
100%. What is the best way that you've found to humble yourself when you're coaching X amount of teams and these pro athletes and where all the cool things that you're doing?
I talked to Dr. Kramer within 30 seconds. I feel like a complete moron. when he says, when Borg and I were talking about building a scale, and you're like, oh, or what do you mean you don't understand the action potential? Don't you know what happens at the cellular level with the sarcomere and this? Well, how does that front squat deviate and, kind of the central nervous system's perception? And, you need to really go like, Roger that. So that's where what I can say though every day is that whether it's to him or to any of my mentors, I'm talking to Mark, I have done my homework, and it's okay too to not have an answer. I think younger, I was ready to give a quick answer or response, but it's like it can be rhetorical. You can just sit there and marinate, and I might come back 6 months later and be like, "That's why you did the drill," and the coaches I work with are like, "Yeah, no, you thought that through," and because they'll at this point give me things to challenge. I don't. Have you ever programmed off time? Have you ever done time sets? So we're gonna do squats and we're gonna do push-ups for 30 seconds, and then
Hmm.
you're gonna do the next thing. So just off time. So what was my first answer?
Yes.
Well, what RM? What percent? Nope, doesn't matter. Do the time. At what point is that time inflection? At what point does that training density? And it probably was a good 6 months where I was like, "But I get it. I understand what's going on here." But if I had not been a receptive student, I would have just been like, "Well, time is time." Like, no, there's a reason why you're telling me this, and trust in that process to make myself better. And so using time sets and elements are something that I've added into the program, but that was through those conversations. So definitely any of the mentors, I get checked so fast, you have no idea. But that's why I get it. I come out, I start the day with, I know that I have so much more to do. I got stuff to read. I'm falling behind, and the final product, I'm going to try each day to get better, but never sitting back and saying, it was the best was Yale, the best was Salve, the best was URI. No, how do we, for every client that we represent, how do we make sure we're giving them the absolute best, and keep pushing forward.
No, 100%. I agree. I have a very loving sister that loves to humble me. And I also remember the hometown I grew up in. I think those two are quickly humbling projects for me.
No doubt, but it makes you better. And that's the thing, is that, again, if you're a student of the game, being humbled shouldn't intimidate you or piss you off. It should motivate you to try to be even better.
100%. And again, it's that what exactly what you said. There's always something you can do better. But it's also, again, a good skill to have is knowing when to back off a little bit, be a little bit nicer to yourself. Okay, I have done okay. There's some things that could change.
Agreed, 100%.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on, Thomas. We're 3 hours 10 minutes in.
Let's
I
go.
appreciate
PR.
you. We love those PRs. We love chasing them. No,
Yep.
thank you so much for your time. If you could let everyone know where they can catch you and can catch the book as well.
Yeah, so super easy. Just go to newmanhp.com. So that's our site that we have for our athletes, but also for our forward facing coaches. Any questions you have from the podcast or just in general, that's probably the best way to be able to connect with me. Also have Instagram, even though I'm terrible at it, but that's just newman.hp. But certainly happy to reach out for anybody to the website, answer any questions you have, and again, pay it forward.
Perfect. And the book is also on Amazon.
Yep. So
If you
anybody, international distributors, everyone should get it. If you can't get it, shoot me an email. But again, we can send to Kenya, we can send to anywhere in Europe, and anywhere in Asia. So happy to help if anyone's having any trouble.
Perfect. Appreciate you so much for coming on, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.